Hello everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the stories. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a ranger at Yellowstone National Park for just over 2 years now. What I'm about to tell you happened last August, during what should have been a routine evening patrol through Lamar Valley. The moon rose, full that night, but something was wrong. Instead of glowing silver white like usual, it hung in the sky like a giant drop of blood. The crimson light it cast made the tall grass look like it was waving in some strange red ocean. I remember checking my watch as I finished my patrol route. 9:45 p.m. Everything had been quiet until my radio crackled to life. "Santos, you copy? We're getting calls from the Miller and Johnson ranches about missing livestock, 3rd time this month." "Copy that," I responded, adjusting the volume. "Any signs of predation?" "Nothing conclusive. No blood trails, no remains. They just vanish." That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The wolf packs that usually howled across the valley were completely silent. In my time at Yellowstone, I'd never heard such stillness. Through my windshield, I could see the bison herds gathering together in tight circles, their calves protected in the center. They only do that when they sense danger nearby. The temperature gauge on my dashboard caught my eye. It had dropped 15 degrees in the last 10 minutes. In August. That's not normal, not even in Wyoming. Then I heard it, a howl that made my skin prickle. It wasn't a wolf. I know wolf calls like the back of my hand. This was deeper, almost like it had words hidden inside it, like it was thinking. I flipped on my high beams as I drove slowly along the access road. Something moved at the edge of the tree line, and for a split second, my lights caught a pair of eyes staring back at me. They glowed bright red instead of the usual green or yellow reflection you get from nocturnal animals. Suddenly, my engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered out, and my radio went silent. Even my flashlight wouldn't turn on. It was like something had sucked all the electricity right out of everything. The silence pressed in around me, broken only by the ticking of my cooling engine. There was no wind, but I could smell something strange, like wet dog fur mixed with the coppery scent of blood. In the distance, a pack of coyotes started their familiar yipping calls. Then, mid-sound, they all stopped at once. Not fading away, but cut off instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Something had silenced them, something bigger, and it was coming my way. I reached up to touch the silver cross hanging around my neck, a habit when I'm nervous. It was my dad's, passed down from my grandmother in Mexico. Dad was a sheriff in Texas before he died. I never go anywhere without this cross. Before becoming a park ranger, I worked as a nurse in a busy Chicago emergency room. I was good at my job, keeping calm when things got crazy, stitching up wounds, saving lives. But after 3 years, I'd seen too much. The face of one little boy caught in gang crossfire still visits me in my dreams. I couldn't save him. That's when I knew I needed a change. The park job seemed perfect. Open spaces, fresh air, and problems I could actually fix. My fiancé would have loved it here. John died in Vietnam 2 years ago. Sometimes I talk to him when I'm alone on patrol, telling him about the elk herds or the way the geysers catch the morning light. At least, I'm not completely alone. My dog Rex keeps me company in my small ranger cabin. He's a border collie mix, with one blue eye and one brown. Smart as a whip too. He usually comes with me on patrols, sitting in the passenger seat like he owns it. Tonight, though, Rex was acting strange. He kept whining and pacing in the back of the Jeep. "What's wrong, buddy?" I whispered, reaching back to scratch behind his ears. He just looked at me with worried eyes. I checked my gear out of habit. First aid kit. Old nurse habits die hard. Compass, maps, emergency flares, and my dad's .357 revolver. 6 bullets, always loaded. The Park Service issues standard sidearms, but I prefer my father's gun. It saved my life more than once from aggressive wildlife. I've tracked injured hikers through blizzards and faced down angry mama bears, but something about tonight felt different, worse. Still, I couldn't just leave. 3 school buses of kids were camping at the north site, and 24 more visitors were scattered across my sector. I tried the ignition one more time. Nothing. "Looks like we're on foot, Rex," I said, grabbing my pack and checking my gun. Rex whimpered and pressed himself against the seat. "Come on, boy. We've got to check on those campers." He wouldn't budge. "Fine. Stay here and guard the jeep." I stepped out into the blood-red moonlight, feeling exposed. The air felt heavy, like right before a massive storm. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky, just that pulsing red moon watching me like an eye. Every instinct told me to run, to hide. But that's not what Rangers do. That's not what I do. People needed me, and I wouldn't let fear stop me from doing my job. With one last look at Rex's worried face, I started walking toward the nearest campsite, my hand resting on my father's gun. I smelled the trouble before I saw it. The campsite was about a half-mile hike from where my jeep died, and as I got closer, a strange mix of smells hit me. Torn canvas, spilled food, and something worse. Blood. The sight made my stomach drop. 3 tents ripped to shreds like they'd been cut by giant knives or claws. Sleeping bags were pulled out and scattered, soaked in dark stains. I knelt down to examine one of the wet patches, and my fingers came away sticky and red. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the night. "Park Ranger, anyone here?" No answer, just the soft creak of trees in the gentle breeze. I drew my gun and moved carefully through the site. No bodies, which gave me hope. Maybe they got away. But where? And from what? That's when I noticed the claw marks on the trees surrounding the camp. I've seen bear marks before. They usually go up about 6 or 7 feet. These were different. They reached nearly 10 feet high and cut deep into the hard bark, like whatever made them was showing off its strength. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They were still fresh, the sap barely starting to ooze. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, gun raised, but saw nothing, just shadows dancing in the red moonlight. Then I spotted something else strange, markings in the dirt. Not footprints, but deliberate scratches forming patterns I'd never seen before. They reminded me of the territorial markings wolves make, but much more complex, almost like writing. I decided to head back to the jeep to get Rex. If anyone was lost or hiding, he could track them. But when I returned, he was still cowering inside, whimpering softly. "Come on, Rex. I need your help, buddy." He just looked at me with frightened eyes, his tail tucked between his legs. "Some guard dog you are," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and tried again to get it working. After a few hard shakes, it flickered to life. I swept the beam around the area surrounding my jeep. The light caught strange tracks in the soft earth. Prints that seemed to shift between wolf paws and human footprints, sometimes in mid-stride. I'd never seen anything like it. In the distance, the howling started again. But this wasn't any wolf pack I'd ever heard. The sounds were wrong, like someone was trying to mimic wolf calls but didn't quite get it right. Or worse, like wolves were trying to form human words. I jumped when my radio suddenly crackled to life, filling the jeep with static. Through the noise, I heard a woman's voice speaking softly in Spanish. My blood went cold. It sounded exactly like my grandmother, who had passed away years ago. She was calling my name, asking for help. The red moon above seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, growing brighter with each throb. I watched, frozen, as shadows moved across its surface, not clouds but something else. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the strange tracks leading away from the campsite. They headed toward a clearing about a quarter mile into the woods. What I found there stopped me in my tracks. A freshly killed elk lay in the center of the clearing, but it wasn't a normal predator kill. The bones had been carefully arranged in a circle around what looked like a fire pit. The skull faced east, toward the rising moon. No animal does that. "This isn't right," I whispered to myself, backing away slowly. "This isn't natural." That's when I heard the rustling behind me and felt hot breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing there, just empty air. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Park Ranger Santos. Identify yourself." The air in front of me shimmered, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then, slowly, something began to take shape. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, darker than the night around it. But then it grew solid. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. Standing before me was, I don't even have words for it. It looked like a wolf, but wrong in every way. It stood on two legs, towering at least 9 feet tall. Its front limbs were too long, ending in hands with fingers and claws instead of paws. But the face, that's what made my blood freeze. A wolf's snout and teeth, but with eyes that looked intelligent, human. Those eyes stared right into mine. And suddenly, images flashed through my mind, running through forests, hunting in packs, tearing into flesh. It wasn't speaking, but somehow it was putting these pictures in my head. The cross at my neck grew hot against my skin, almost burning. The creature tilted its head, studying me like I was a puzzle. Then it looked past me, and I felt rather than heard it call to others. They emerged from the trees all around me, 6 more of them, smaller than the first but just as terrifying. They moved like liquid shadow, sometimes becoming see-through, then solid again. I fired a shot at the nearest one. The bullet passed right through it like it was made of smoke. The creature seemed to laugh, a horrible sound between a growl and human chuckles. But I noticed something. When I fired, they all became solid for just a split second, as if startled. That's when my bullet hit a tree behind the creature, leaving a smoking hole in the bark. "You need to be solid to attack," I said aloud, understanding dawning. "You can't hurt me when you're whatever you are now." The big one, the alpha, snarled, showing teeth as long as my fingers. In my head I heard something like words, smart prey, more fun. They began to circle me, moving with perfect coordination. I'd seen wolf packs hunt before. They were herding me, driving me somewhere. I fired again, this time waiting until one lunged and became solid. The bullet hit its shoulder and it yelped, a sound too human for comfort. Black liquid, that I guessed, was blood oozed from the wound. That made them more cautious, but they kept pushing me backward, step by step, toward the far side of the clearing. I thought about Rex, still hiding in the jeep. For the first time, I was glad he hadn't come with me. These things would have torn him apart in seconds. "What do you want?" I shouted, though I wasn't sure they could understand words. More images flashed in my mind, humans running, screaming, being hunted. Then something else, my father's face. I hadn't seen a photo of him in years, but there he was in my mind, looking terrified. "How do you know my father?" I gasped. The alpha's mouth seemed to form a grin. In my head, old prey, got away, found daughter. They had been hunting my family? This made no sense. My father died of a heart attack while on duty as sheriff. At least, that's what I'd been told. I kept backing up until I felt solid stone behind me. I was against the base of a cliff with nowhere to run. The creature spread out in a half circle, blocking any escape. The alpha stepped forward, becoming fully solid as it prepared to attack. Its claws extended, dripping with some kind of black saliva. I raised my gun, knowing I had only 4 bullets left and 7 monsters to deal with. The red moonlight caught on my silver cross, making it shine brightly. The alpha flinched back, raising a clawed hand as if to shield its eyes. That's when I realized It wasn't just startled by my gunshot earlier. The silver, it was afraid of the silver. My mind raced. Silver. These things were afraid of silver, just like in the old werewolf stories my grandmother used to tell, but I only had one small cross, not nearly enough to fight them all. I looked down at my pack, the emergency flares. If I could melt the silver cross, maybe... The Alpha lunged forward, claws slashing through the air where my head had been a second before. I rolled sideways, firing another shot that caught it in the leg. It howled in pain but kept coming. I scrambled behind a large boulder, fumbling in my pack for a flare. My fingers closed around the metal tube just as one of the smaller creatures phased right through the rock beside me, becoming solid as it reached for my throat. I jammed my gun against its chest and fired. The creature fell back, black blood pooling beneath it. 3 bullets left. The others were circling now, more cautious after seeing their packmate fall. I used the moment to light the flare, its harsh, red light adding to the blood moon glow. I yanked the cross from my neck, breaking the chain. "Dad, I hope this works," I whispered, holding the silver cross over the flare's flame. It began to melt faster than I expected, silver droplets falling onto my multi-tool I'd laid open beneath it. The Alpha was watching me, its eyes narrowing. As it realized what I was doing, it barked something to the others, and they began closing in from all sides. With shaking hands, I pried open one of my remaining bullets, using the pliers on my multi-tool. I carefully tipped out half the gunpowder, replacing it with the melted silver as best I could, before jamming the bullet back together. It was messy, but it might work. I loaded it into the chamber just as the Alpha charged. It phased in and out of solidity, making it impossible to track. 1 second it was 10 feet away, the next it was right in front of me, its jaws snapping. At my face. I fell backward, losing my gun in the process. The creature's weight pinned me down, its hot breath on my face smelling of rotting meat. Its packmate circled, waiting for the kill. My hand frantically searched the ground, fingers finally closing around the handle of my gun. I pressed it against the Alpha's chest and pulled the trigger. The makeshift silver bullet entered its body with a sound like sizzling meat. The creature reared back, howling in agony. As black smoke poured from the wound, it staggered backward, its form flickering between solid and transparent. But it wasn't dead. It snarled at me, hatred burning in those 2 human eyes. The images it forced into my mind were violent now. Memories of my father fighting similar creatures years ago, wounding the Alpha before escaping. I realized with horror that it had been hunting my family for generations. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. These things had found him. The Alpha backed away, wounded but still dangerous. It gestured to its pack, and they began herding. Me again, this time toward a small rise in the distance. Somehow I knew that place was bad news. "The burial ground," I whispered, remembering stories from the local tribes about an ancient site where the barrier between worlds was thin. If they got me there, I'd have no chance. I had 2 regular bullets left and 1 makeshift silver bullet I'd managed to create while they regrouped. Not enough to take them all on. The moon above began to darken at one edge. An eclipse was starting. Something I hadn't known was scheduled. The creatures noticed too, becoming agitated as the shadow crept across the blood-red surface. One of them rushed me from behind. I spun and fired, catching it in the throat with a regular bullet. It fell, wounded but still moving. 1 bullet left, plus my special silver one. The remaining 4 creatures, plus the wounded Alpha, continued, pushing me toward the burial ground. I could see it now, a circle of standing stones atop the small hill, looking ancient and wrong somehow. As we got closer, the creatures seemed to grow stronger, more solid. The Alpha's wound was healing before my eyes. I needed a plan. The eclipse was growing, now covering half the moon's surface. The creatures kept glancing up at it nervously. That's when I realized the eclipse was weakening them. They were creatures of the moon, and as it darkened, so did their power. I just needed to delay until the eclipse was complete. I fired my last regular bullet into the air, startling them. Then I turned and ran, not away from the burial ground, but straight toward it. The alpha howled in triumph, thinking I was panicking. The pack followed, not realizing I was leading them into a trap. I reached the center of the stone circle and turned to face them, gun raised with my final silver bullet ready. "Come on," I whispered. "Just a little longer." The moon darkened further, now just a slim crescent of red. The creatures slowed, their forms becoming less stable. The alpha realized my plan too late. It charged, desperate to reach me before the eclipse was complete. I raised the gun, remembering everything my father had taught me about shooting. Wait for the perfect moment. Breathe out slowly. Squeeze. Don't pull. As the last sliver of moonlight vanished, I fired. The silver bullet struck the alpha directly between its eyes. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then it let out a scream that sounded like nothing on this earth. Its body began to dissolve, black smoke pouring from every pore. The other creatures froze, watching their leader die. Then, as one, they scattered. Two of them seemed to tear holes in the very air itself, disappearing into nothingness. The others fled into the forest, their howls fading into the distance. I collapsed to my knees, shaking all over. It was over. I had survived. When dawn came, I made my way back to my jeep. Rex was still there, and when he saw me, he bounded out, licking my face as if nothing had happened. The radio was working again. I called in, reporting a predator attack at the campsite, but nothing about what I'd really seen. Who would believe me? 2 weeks later, I handed in my resignation. I couldn't stay in the park, not after what happened. The locals told me to be careful of the full moon. That wolf activity always increased during that time. If only they knew. Sometimes at night I still hear howling that doesn't sound quite right. And I keep my father's gun, now loaded with silver. Bullets I carefully made myself, close at hand, because 2 of them escaped, and I have a feeling they'll be back someday. For now, though, I'm alive. And that's more than I expected when I faced down the howling shadow under that blood moon. My name is Bill Thornfield, and I've seen things in these woods that no man should ever have to see. What happened that October morning still haunts me, even now, years later. It started at dawn. The sun was barely peeking over the mountains. When I reached Mirror Lake, something wasn't right. The air felt wrong. Despite being fall, ice crystals were forming along the shore, delicate, impossible frost patterns spreading across rocks that should have been wet with morning dew. I checked my pocket watch, 5:47 a.m. Way too early in the year for ice, especially with the mild autumn we'd been having. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was seeing things, but that cold mist rising from the water was real. It curled and twisted like it had a mind of its own. That's when I noticed the ravens. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, bursting from the trees all at once, their black wings beating frantically against the morning sky. Their cries echoed off the mountains, not normal calls, but something desperate and afraid. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I could barely make out the Weather Service report. Unexplained temperature drop. 30 degrees below seasonal average. Meteorologists baffled. I shut it off and knelt down to examine some fresh deer tracks in the soft earth. They led straight to the water's edge, and then nothing, like the deer had vanished into thin air. I've tracked animals all my life, and I've never seen tracks end like that. I exhaled, watching my breath form a cloud in front of my face. That made no sense. The thermometer on my pack read 55 degrees, but my body felt the bite of winter. Looking up, I spotted something even stranger. The ancient hemlocks lining the shore had frost damage, but only on their southern sides. Any forester knows winter damage comes from the north. It was like the cold was coming from the wrong direction, breaking the rules of nature itself. Rex, my German shepherd, stayed glued to my side. Normally he'd be running ahead, sniffing everything, but today he pressed against my leg, whimpering softly. When I moved toward the lake for a closer look, he refused to follow. His ears were flat against his head, tail tucked between his legs. A thick fog began rolling in from the north, unlike any mist I'd seen before. It didn't drift, it crawled, heavy and purposeful. And the smell, God, the smell, like old meat left too long in the sun, mixed with something metallic like blood. Then came the silence. One moment the forest was filled with morning sounds, distant bird calls, insects, the gentle rustle of leaves. The next, nothing. Absolute quiet, like someone had thrown a switch. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the sound of my breath and nothing else. The forest was holding its breath, waiting, and deep down, I knew something was watching me. I've been a park ranger for 15 years now, ever since I came back from Vietnam. The wilderness was the only place I could find any peace after what I saw over there. My hand went to my chest pocket, feeling the familiar shape of my dad's old WWI compass. Next to it was the worn photo of my brother Danny in his uniform, smiling that carefree smile before the jungle took him. Some days I carry them as good luck charms, other days they're just reminders of what I've lost. The quiet of the forest usually helps with the memories, the flashbacks. But lately, they've been getting worse. Margaret couldn't take it anymore. 6 months ago, she packed her bags while I was on overnight patrol. "I can't compete with ghosts, Bill," she'd written in her note. Maybe she was right. I rubbed my hands together for warmth, my fingers tracing the raised scars where the shrapnel went in. My left leg was aching too. It always does when the weather changes suddenly. Another souvenir from a war I'm still fighting in my dreams. At least I had Rex. He came from the shelter 3 years ago as broken as I was. Something about the way he looked at me, like he understood what it meant to be haunted by things no one else could see. He never judges when I wake up shouting. In the middle of the night. I've walked every inch of this park. I know where the black bears den in winter, where the trout run in spring. I've seen blizzards and floods and everything in between. But this weather, this wasn't natural. It felt deliberate, almost like it was being controlled. My ranger station was 8 miles back through dense forest. No cell service out here, and the radio was mostly static. I should have called in. Back up when I first noticed the temperature drop, but what would I say? "Hey boss, it's cold and spooky out here." They'd think I was losing it for sure. I checked my gear out of habit, rifle secured across my back, knife at my belt, first aid kit, matches, emergency flares. I had enough supplies to last 3 days if needed. I've always been prepared for anything nature could throw at me. Or, so I thought. I whistled softly for Rex to heel as we moved away from the lake. He came reluctantly, still watching the water with suspicious eyes. I needed to investigate further, to find some logical explanation for what was happening. Maybe a weather anomaly, or I stopped mid-thought. Something wasn't right. The feeling crept up my spine. A familiar sensation from my time in the jungle, the quiet before an ambush, the knowledge that you're being watched, hunted. My hand moved to my rifle strap, not drawing it yet, but ready. Rex sensed my tension and grew alert, his ears perked forward. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, not believing my own words. "Let's keep moving." But deep down, I knew we weren't alone in these woods anymore. And whatever was out there, it wasn't anything I'd been trained to face. We hiked for about an hour, the unnatural cold growing worse with each step. That's when I spotted it through the trees, an old hunting cabin I knew well. I'd taken shelter there during storms before, but something was wrong. Even from a distance, I could see the door hanging sideways, torn clean off its hinges. "Stay." "Close," I told Rex as we approached. The door hadn't been broken in. It had been ripped outward, like something inside had desperately wanted out. My rifle was in my hands now as I stepped through the doorway. The cabin was a mess. Furniture, overturned, supplies scattered. But what made my blood run cold was what I found on the table. A half-eaten deer haunch, frozen solid despite there being no refrigeration. I leaned closer, and saw something that turned my stomach. The meat hadn't been cut with a knife. It had been chewed, with human teeth marks tearing into the flesh. "What the hell?" I whispered. The walls told an even worse story. Bloody handprints smeared across the rough wood, not like someone painting with blood, but like someone desperate to escape. In places, the prints became deep scratches where fingernails had dug into the wood so hard they'd broken off, still embedded there. I checked my thermometer again. The temperature had dropped another 20 degrees in just 5 minutes. I could see my breath hanging thick in the air now, almost solid in the unnatural cold. Rex whined and moved to the cabin's back door, which stood open to the woods. He sniffed the ground, then looked up at me with worried eyes before trotting out. I followed him about 50 yards into the trees, where he stopped and began pawing at what looked like a fresh snowdrift. Snow in October, in weather that had been mild just hours ago. I knelt down beside Rex and brushed away the snow. My hand hit something hard. Bone, human bone. I dug faster, uncovering what was left of a skeleton. The remains weren't old. There were still scraps of fresh tissue clinging to them. But what made me recoil was how they'd been gnawed, the larger. Bones cracked open as if someone had been desperate to get at the marrow inside. The marks were human teeth. Someone, or something, had been eating this person. I stood up quickly, wiping my hands on my pants. That's when I heard it. A howl, echoing through the trees. Not a wolf or coyote, but something wrong. It seemed to come from 3 directions at once, surrounding us, though that should have been impossible. Rex growled, turning in circles, unable to pinpoint the source. I pulled out my compass, but the needle was spinning wildly, north becoming east, then south, then spinning completely round before stopping dead. Useless. "We need to get back to the station," I told Rex, trying to keep my voice steady. We had to report this, to get help. As we started moving, I noticed something in the fresh snow that hadn't been there minutes before. Footprints. They started as human tracks, normal boot prints like mine. But as they continued, they changed, lengthening, the toes stretching into what looked like claws. Not animal tracks I recognized, but something in between man and beast. My radio crackled, to life on its own. Through the static I heard voices, my own voice, playing backwards, saying things I'd never said, words that made no sense but filled me with dread. I switched it off and picked up my pace, Rex right beside me. Whatever was happening in these woods wasn't natural, and we were heading straight toward it. We ran for what felt like hours, but the sun hadn't moved in the sky. It was like time itself had frozen along with the forest. The cold was bone deep, now painful with each breath I took. I stopped to catch my breath behind a large oak tree, Rex panting beside me. That's when the snow began to fall. Thick, heavy flakes that shouldn't exist in this season. Within minutes, it covered the ground in white silence. "We're going to be okay," I whispered to Rex, not believing my own words. His ears suddenly perked up, and he stared into the thickening snowfall. That's when I saw it. Through the curtain of snow, a figure emerged. At first, I thought it was just a tall man, but as it came closer, I realized it was impossibly tall, at least 12 feet high. Its body was painfully thin, skin stretched tight over visible bones like it was starving to death. But the skin, it wasn't. Quite solid. I could see through it in places like looking through dirty ice. Its eyes locked onto mine, cold blue fire that burned without heat. When it breathed, frost formed in the air, crystallizing and falling to the ground like glass. "William," it whispered, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't using just any voice. It was using Danny's voice, my dead brother's voice. "Why did you leave me behind, Billy?" The voice changed, becoming my father's. "Son, I'm so cold, so hungry." My hands shook as I raised my rifle. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Whatever you are, stay back!" The thing smiled, showing teeth like icicles. It raised one long, clawed hand, and suddenly the gentle snowfall became a blinding blizzard, wind howling around us, tearing at my clothes. A hunger hit me then, not like any hunger I'd felt before. It was a desperate, clawing need that made my stomach twist in knots. Images flashed in my mind of Rex, his meat, his warmth, of Margaret, of human flesh. "No!" I screamed, fighting the thoughts. This thing was putting them in my head. Rex barked furiously and lunged at the creature. I tried to grab him, but he was too quick. He leaped at the monster and passed right through it like it was made of fog. He hit the snow hard on the other side, yelping as frost immediately covered his fur. He tried to stand, but collapsed, shivering violently. "Rex!" I fired my rifle. The bullets passed harmlessly through the creature, which laughed with the voices of everyone I'd ever loved and lost. "Join us, William," it said, its form shifting and changing. "The hunger never ends, but it feels so good to feed." It showed me visions then. Horrible, vivid pictures of myself tearing into Rex's flesh, of finding Margaret and doing unspeakable things. Each vision made the creature grow stronger, more solid, feeding on my horror and disgust. I grabbed Rex, tucking him inside my jacket for warmth, and ran blindly through the storm. But no matter which direction I chose, the trees would shift and move, the paths changing until I found myself facing the creature again. "You can't escape," it said, now using Margaret's voice. "The Hunger Walker always finds those who enter." It's Forrest, the Hunger Walker. The name hit me like a physical blow. I remembered old stories from the Mohawk who lived near the park, tales of the Wendigo, a spirit of winter and starvation that possessed humans and turned them into cannibals. But those were just stories, weren't they? The creature seemed to read my thoughts. "I am older than your kind," it said. "I'm the hunger in the longest night. I'm the cold that never leaves your bones." I backed away, Rex whimpering against my chest. We were trapped in a maze of ice and snow, with a monster from nightmares hunting us. And it was getting closer. My mind raced as the Hunger Walker drifted closer. Bullets passed through it like air. You can't fight mist with a knife, but there had to be a way. Fire. The thought hit me suddenly. In all the old stories, evil spirits feared fire. It was worth a shot. I had nothing else. I reached into my pack with trembling fingers, finding the emergency flares. 3 of them, bright red tubes designed to signal for help. Next to them was my small can of camp fuel. "Come to me, William," the creature moaned, its bony fingers reaching for me. "End your suffering. Embrace the hunger." "Go to hell," I growled, striking the first flare. It ignited with a bright, angry hiss, the heat almost painful after so much cold. The Wendigo flinched back, its blue eyes narrowing. I threw the flare directly at it. The creature shrieked, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake, and moved back, avoiding the fire. The flare sputtered in the snow, but I'd seen enough. Fire hurt it. With Rex still tucked inside my jacket, I ran, no longer trying to escape the forest, but heading back toward the hunting cabin. I had a plan now, not a good one, but a plan. The Hunger Walker pursued us, moving between the trees like smoke, sometimes disappearing only to reappear directly in my path. Each time, I'd wave the second flare I'd lit, and it would back away, screeching. We reached a lake, not Mirror Lake, but a smaller one I didn't recognize. It was completely frozen, though it shouldn't have been in this season. I stepped onto the ice, hearing it creak beneath my weight. "Nowhere to run," the creature's voice echoed across the frozen surface. It stood at the lake's edge, growing larger, more solid as it fed on my fear. I struck my last flare and threw it at the monster's feet, buying just enough time to reach the center of the lake. The cabin was visible on the far shore, so close. The ice cracked beneath me with each step. The Wendigo was on the lake now too, bringing unnatural cold that made the ice thicken where it walked. But around me, the flare's heat was weakening. The surface. Rex squirmed inside my jacket, suddenly alert. He barked once, a warning. I turned to see the hunger walker directly behind me, reaching with those long, terrible fingers. The cold it radiated was unbearable, burning my skin like dry ice. "You are mine," it whispered in Margaret's voice. Rex broke free from my jacket and leaped at the creature, not attacking it directly, but circling it, barking and drawing its attention. "Rex, no!" I shouted, but he was buying me time. The loyal dog I didn't deserve. I made it to the shore and ran for the cabin. Inside, I quickly dumped the camp fuel over everything that would burn, old furniture, paper, fabric. My hands shook so badly I could barely strike a match, but finally the flame caught. The fire spread quickly as I backed out of the cabin. The hunger walker was on the shore now, Rex still barking and keeping it distracted. The creature turned toward the growing. "Fire!" Its face twisted in what looked like fear. "Over here!" I yelled, drawing its attention back to me. I needed it close to the cabin. It came at me with frightening speed, no longer drifting but charging like a predator. I waited until the last second, then dove aside. The Wendigo's momentum carried it toward the now fully engulfed cabin. It screamed as the heat hit it, a sound I'll never forget. Not human, not animal, but something ancient and full of hate. It thrashed and tried to retreat, but something was happening. The fire seemed to be solidifying it, making it more physical, less ghostly. The ice beneath us cracked with a sound like gunshots. The Wendigo's supernatural cold fought against the fire's heat, and the lake itself was breaking apart. I scrambled to grab Rex, but the ice gave way beneath us. We plunged into the freezing water, and so did the hunger walker. Underwater, everything was dark and silent. The cold was so intense, it felt like my skin was being peeled off. But something strange was happening to the creature. In the water, it seemed confused, more solid. Its movements were slower. I remembered something then, an old Mohawk man who sometimes came to the ranger station. He'd once shown me symbols carved into his walking stick, saying they protected against evil spirits. My diving knife was still at my belt. With lungs burning for air, I grabbed the thrashing Wendigo and carved those symbols into its now solid chest. The water around us began to glow with an impossible light. The creature writhed and fought, but the symbols burned into its flesh like brands. It was fully physical now. No longer mist, but something I could fight. We struggled in the freezing darkness, my consciousness fading fast. With the last of my strength, I wrapped my arms around its neck and held it down, kept it underwater. As it clawed at me with those terrible hands, 1 minute passed. 2, my vision darkened. The thing was still fighting, but weaker now. Could it drown? I didn't know, but I wasn't letting go. The last thing I remember before blacking out was Rex's teeth gripping my collar, pulling me upward toward a distant light. I woke up on the shore, coughing up lake water, my clothes frozen stiff to my body. Rex was beside me, his fur icy, but his tongue warm as he licked my face. The hunger walker was gone. Whether it drowned or just retreated, I couldn't say. The unnatural blizzard had stopped, though the lake remained frozen solid. It took us 6 hours to stagger back to the ranger station. I never filed a report about what happened. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw, what I fought. They say that lake, I later learned it's called Black Pond, stays frozen year-round now, even in summer. Locals talk about strange ice formations that appear overnight, like frozen hands reaching up from the depths. I still work these woods, but I never go near Black Pond. And when the first snow falls each year, Rex and I stay inside, doors locked, fire burning bright all night long. Because sometimes on the coldest nights, I swear I can hear it calling my name. My name is James McKinnon. I'm a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I've seen things in these woods that I can't explain, things that shouldn't be possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It all started on a misty April morning, the kind where fog hangs between the trees like ghosts. I was doing my weekly patrol, following the trail that winds past Cataract Falls. The dogwoods were in bloom, their white flowers standing out against the dark mountain slopes like scattered bones. That thought made me shiver, though I didn't know why at the time. I remember how my boots crunched over something strange that morning. Not fallen leaves or twigs, but some kind of white, chalky stuff covering patches of the forest floor. Bent down and rubbed some between my fingers. It felt like crushed eggshells or bone dust. I wiped my hand on my pants and kept walking. The streams weren't right either. The water was cloudy white, like milk mixed with water. We'd had plenty of spring rain lately, so it should have been running clear. I dipped my canteen in anyway. Needed to collect a sample to test back at the station. Even the birds sounded wrong. Their songs echoed in ways they shouldn't, bouncing around like we were inside a cave instead of an open forest. It made the hair on my neck stand up. Somewhere in these mountains are old Cherokee burial grounds. Nobody knows exactly where anymore. The locations were lost over time, but standing there that morning, I felt like they were watching me. The little Geiger counter I carry, standard issue after they found those uranium deposits last year, started clicking. Not loud, but steady. That wasn't normal. I checked it twice, thinking it was broken. I noticed something else weird, too. The wildflowers were growing in perfect circles, like someone had planted them that way, and when I stepped in the middle of one of these circles, the ground felt hollow underneath, like I might fall through. The sun finally broke through the mist around 9 o'clock, but it didn't make things better. The shadows seemed wrong. I'd look at a tree's shadow, then look away, and when I looked back it seemed to have moved just a little, even though the sun hadn't shifted. The strangest thing of all, no animal tracks, not a single one, no deer, no bears, no elk, nothing. In 15 years working these mountains, I'd never seen that before. It was like all the animals knew to stay away. I should have known then, should have turned around, gone back to the station, and called for backup. But I didn't. I kept walking deeper into the woods, following a trail of white dust that seemed to glow in the shadows, leading me towards something I never should have found. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself. I'm not just any park ranger. Before this job, I was a medic in the Korean War. I still carry my medic's cross in my pocket, a small metal cross that reminds me of those days. I also keep a worn photo of my unit. The faces of those young men haunt me, especially the ones I couldn't save during our retreat from Seoul. I tried my best, but sometimes your best just isn't enough. Last year, I lost my wife Helen to bone cancer. The doctor said it was one of the worst cases they'd seen. It spread so fast. After she was gone, I couldn't stand to be around people much. These mountains became my escape. The quiet helps. Helps me forget, at least for a little while. I'm pretty good at my job. I can track animals, read the land, and find my way through the roughest terrain. My time as a field medic taught me how to patch up injuries, too, which comes in handy when hikers get themselves hurt out here. Home for me is a small cabin near the edge of the park. I live there with my old bloodhound, General. He's getting on in years now, and his arthritis makes it hard for him to get around some days. Still, he's good company. The knife on my belt belonged to my grandfather. It has a handle made from deer bone that's turned yellow with age. He used to say it would protect me from evil spirits in the woods. I never believed those stories until recently. The military taught me more than medicine. I learned how to survive in the wilderness, how to explore caves safely, and how to keep my head when things get scary. Those skills would save my life soon enough. I don't like to talk about my left hand much. It's not real, just a prosthetic. I got after shrapnel tore up the original in Korea. It works well enough, but it makes people stare sometimes. I've gotten used to it mostly. I won't lie. I drink more whiskey than I should. It helps quiet the memories, helps me sleep without seeing the faces of dead soldiers or Helen in her hospital bed. My dad was the same way after the First World War. Maybe it runs in the family. One thing about me, I'm stubborn. My mother always said I got the worst of the Irish pride from both sides of the family. I don't like asking for help even when I need it. I guess I figured I could handle whatever was happening in those woods by myself. That was my first mistake. As I followed that strange white trail deeper into the forest, I kept thinking I should turn back, should call someone on the radio. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity, maybe, or something else. Something I couldn't explain then, and still can't explain now. All I know is that with each step, the ache in my bones grew stronger, like they were being pulled towards something hidden in the heart of the mountains. About a mile into my hike, I came across a campsite. At first glance, it looked like the campers had just stepped away. Their backpacks were still there. A small fire pit had been used recently. But something was off. All the tent poles were gone, just gone. The tents themselves lay flat on the ground like deflated balloons. Every hiking stick was missing too. I checked the backpacks, thinking maybe the campers had packed up those items first, but that's when I noticed something even stranger. Any item with calcium in it was missing. The campers' antacid tablets, vitamin bottles, even packets of powdered milk, all gone. Everything else was left behind, including wallets with cash and expensive cameras. This wasn't a robbery. It was something else. I looked up when a soft tinkling sound caught my attention. Hanging from the branches above the campsite were what looked like wind chimes made of bones. Small bones strung together, clicking against each other in the breeze. They played an eerie melody that made my skin crawl. I whistled for General, who had wandered off to sniff around the campsite. He came limping back, moving worse than I'd seen in months. Just yesterday he'd been fine after his arthritis medication, but now he whined and refused to follow any scent trail from the camp. He kept looking back the way we'd come, as if begging me to turn around. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but he just whined louder. About 50 yards from the camp, I saw something that stopped me cold. A deer skeleton, completely intact, standing upright on all four legs, like it was still alive, just without flesh. That's impossible. When animals die, their skeletons fall apart. They don't stay perfectly connected, and they sure don't stand up on their own. As I stared at this impossible sight, the strangest thing happened. My prosthetic hand began to ache. A phantom pain where my real hand used to be. It felt like someone was pulling on the bones that weren't there anymore, calling to them. I backed away from the deer skeleton and nearly fell into a stream. When I turned to steady myself, I saw something I'd never noticed before, a cave opening behind a small waterfall. I've patrolled this area for years. That cave wasn't there before, I'd swear to it. Water dripped from the cave ceiling, forming stalactites that shouldn't exist. Stalactites take thousands of years to form, but these looked fresh, growing right before my eyes. They hung down in patterns that looked eerily like human rib cages. I pulled out my radio to call the station. Through the static came the normal voice of Chuck, the dispatcher, but behind his words I heard something else, a clicking sound, like bones tapping together in rhythm. I tried to tell Chuck what I'd found, but the clicking grew louder until it drowned out his voice completely. That's when the pain started, not just in my missing hand, but in all my bones. A deep ache, like they were being pulled toward the cave by some invisible force. General howled beside me, feeling it too. I should have left right then. Should have grabbed General and run as fast as I could back toward the ranger station. But that pulling sensation, it was like a fishhook in my chest, drawing me forward. "Come on, boy," I said to General, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit. "Let's see what's in there." General whined, but followed me, loyal to the end. Together we stepped into the darkness of the cave, the bone wind chimes singing behind us. The cave was cold and damp. Our flashlight beams cut through darkness so thick it felt alive. Water dripped from the ceiling, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. General stayed close to my legs, whimpering softly. We'd gone about 50 yards in when I heard it, a sound like wooden wind chimes, but deeper, hollow. the clicking of bone against bone. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice bouncing back at me from the stone walls. No answer came, just more clicking. Then, from the shadows ahead, something moved. At first I thought it was a person, maybe a lost hiker. But as it stepped into our flashlight beam, my blood turned to ice. It wasn't human, not even close. The thing stood at least 8 feet tall, towering over me like a giant. Its body was made entirely of bones, not just human bones, but animal bones too, all fused together in impossible ways. Deer antlers crowned its skull-like head. Its fingers were bird skulls, clicking together as they moved. This was no costume, no trick. The bones moved smoothly, as if held together by invisible muscles and tendons. General growled beside me, his fur standing on end. The creature turned its empty eye sockets toward us and made that clicking sound again, but this time it almost sounded like words. Click, click, clack, click, clack, click. To my horror, I realized I could almost understand it, like a language, just beyond my grasp. The thing, I later came to think of it as the marrow thief, raised its arms. Around us the shadows moved. Bones scattered on the cave floor began to rise, assembling themselves into small animals. Rats, squirrels, birds, all skeletons, all moving as if alive. An army of bone servants. I backed away, pulling General with me, but my prosthetic left hand suddenly jerked forward on its own, as if responding to the creature's call. I grabbed my wrist with my right hand, fighting against the pull. General yelped in pain beside me. His back legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground, whining. The arthritis that had been bothering him for months seemed to worsen before. My eyes, as if something was sucking the calcium from his joints. I tried to run, to drag General with me, but the cave had changed. Bone walls had grown across passages that were open just moments before, turning the cave into a maze. The creature was reshaping our escape route, trapping us. "What do you want?" I shouted, desperate. The clicking stopped. Then a vision filled my mind. Helen, my Helen, but not as she was in life. Her skeleton stood before me, hand outstretched, inviting me to join her in death. The marrow thief was offering to reunite us. For one terrible moment I wanted to accept, to let go, to be with her again. But then I felt General's warm body against my leg, still fighting to stand, still alive. "No," I said firmly, pushing the vision away. "You can't have her, and you can't have me." The creature's skull face couldn't show expression, but I felt its anger vibrate through the cave. It stepped forward, moving through a solid rock wall as if it were mist. But I noticed something. When it manipulated the bones around us, reshaping the cave, it became more solid, more vulnerable. I reached for my grandfather's bone-handled knife, wondering if it could hurt this thing made of bone. The creature seemed to recognize the knife and paused, those empty eye sockets fixed on the yellowed handle. In that moment of hesitation, I grabbed General and backed away toward what I hoped was the way out. The clicking sounds followed us, growing louder, angrier, as the marrow thief realized its prey was escaping. I had no plan, no idea how to fight this thing. All I knew was we needed to get out of that cave, but with every step, my bones ached more fiercely, and General grew heavier in my arms. The marrow thief was draining us both, and time was running out. As we stumbled through the bone maze, my mind raced. All my training as a medic suddenly seemed important in a way I never expected. The creature, this marrow thief, needed bone marrow to keep its form. That's why it was draining calcium from General, from me, from everything around it. Living bone. That was its food, its power source. I remembered how it had paused when I drew my grandfather's knife. The yellowed bone handle was old, dead, no living marrow inside. And my prosthetic hand, it had tried to control it but couldn't fully because there was no real bone there. That gave me an idea. I set General down gently behind a rock. Formation. "Stay, boy," I whispered, though I knew he was too weak to follow anyway. His eyes, cloudy with age, looked up at me with trust that broke my heart. I took a deep breath and unstrapped my prosthetic hand. It felt strange. I'd worn it for so long it had become part of me. But now I held it like a weapon. The clicking sounds grew closer. The marrow thief was coming, and it wasn't alone. All around us, more skeletons were rising, not just animals this time. Human skeletons, old and yellowed with age. I realized with horror that we must be near the lost Cherokee burial grounds. The creature was raising an army of the dead. I pressed myself against the cave wall, waiting. When the first skeleton warrior came around the corner, I swung my prosthetic hand like a club, shattering its skull. The bones collapsed, but immediately began reassembling. This wouldn't work for long. I needed to get to the marrow thief itself. I darted between the bone warriors, using my smaller size to my advantage. My boots crunched over scattered bones as I ran deeper into the cave, drawing the creature away from General. The clicking grew louder, angrier. The cave shook with the creature's rage. Then I saw it, the heart of the cave, a chamber where thousands of stalactites hung like teeth from the ceiling. And in the center stood the marrow thief, its bone body glowing with an inner light as it directed its army. I noticed something else, points on its body that pulsed brighter than the rest. As a medic, I recognized them. They were the spots, where bone marrow is most active in a human body, the breastbone, the hip bones, the ends of the long limb bones. These had to be its weak points where it absorbed calcium. I gripped my prosthetic hand tightly and charged. The marrow thief saw me coming. It raised its arms, and bone walls shot up from the ground to block my path. But I was ready this time. I dodged and weaved, getting closer with each step. A howl echoed through the cave. General! Somehow, my loyal old dog had found the strength to follow me. He limped into the chamber, fur raised, teeth bared despite his pain. "General, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. My brave dog launched himself at the marrow thief, his teeth clamping down on one of those glowing points. The creature let out a sound like 1,000 bones breaking at once. Its control wavered, and the skeleton army faltered, bones clattering to the ground. General held on, growling through clenched teeth, but I could see the life draining from him as the creature fought back. I had seconds, not minutes. I ran to my backpack where I kept emergency supplies, including the small explosive charges we used to clear fallen trees from trails. With shaking hands, I set them against the cave, ceiling right above the marrow thief. "General," I called, "come." Whether he heard me or simply knew his job was done, my faithful dog released his grip and limped toward me, his movements growing weaker by the second. I scooped him up in my right arm, holding the detonator in my prosthetic hand. The marrow thief recovered, its bone army beginning to rise again. It turned those empty eye sockets toward me. "Click, click, clack, you cannot escape." "Watch me," I said, and pressed the button. The explosion was deafening. Rocks and stalactites crashed down, crushing the marrow thief beneath tons of stone. I ran. General clutched to my chest as the cave collapsed behind us. I barely made it out. As daylight hit my face, I felt a terrible pain in my right arm, my good arm. Looking down, I saw it withering before my eyes, the calcium draining from the bones as the marrow thief's final attack reached me. I fell to my knees at the cave entrance, holding General close as darkness took us both. I woke up 3 days later in the Park Service Hospital. General didn't make it. They buried him on a hillside, overlooking the mountains he loved to roam. My right arm couldn't be saved. The doctors had never seen anything like it. The bones completely drained of calcium, like severe osteoporosis, but impossibly rapid. Now I have prosthetics on both sides. I left the Park Service after that. Couldn't do the job with no hands, they said. I didn't argue. I'd seen enough of those mountains. I live in town now. Folks think I'm just another war veteran down on his luck. They don't know what happened in that cave, and I don't tell them. Who would believe me? But I know the marrow thief isn't dead. Can't kill something that was never alive to begin with. After big storms, people find those bone wind chimes hanging in the trees near the park boundary. And every spring, hikers report finding perfectly arranged animal skeletons standing in clearings as if frozen mid-step. I keep my grandfather's bone knife with me always. Its handle has grown whiter over time, healthier somehow. Sometimes at night I think I hear clicking sounds outside my window, bones calling to bones. And sometimes, in my dreams, I see Helen waiting for me, her skeleton hand outstretched. But General is always there too, barking, keeping her at bay until I wake up. One day, I might take her hand, but not yet. Not until I'm sure the marrow. Thief is truly gone from these mountains. Until then, I wait, and I listen for the sound of bones in the night. My name is Rebecca Nash, and I've seen things in these canyons that I can't explain, things that shouldn't exist in our world. The September sunset was painting the red rock canyons in shades of orange and purple as I finished my border patrol near the Navajo Reservation. The beauty of Arizona's Coconino National Forest never gets old, even after 3 years as a park ranger here. The massive sandstone formations looked like they were on fire as the last rays of sunlight hit them. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage smoke from somewhere distant. I could hear drums too, traditional Navajo drums beating, a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. Probably a ceremony on the reservation lands. I tried not to think about how the sound carried farther than it should have. My radio crackled with static. I tapped it against my palm twice, an old habit. Nash to base, checking in before heading back. Over. More static, then a garbled voice I could barely make out. Base to Nash. Solar flare, interference. Back before dark. Great. The solar flare activity they'd warned us about was messing with communications, just what I needed when I was this far out. I noticed something odd then, a group of roadrunners darting across the trail ahead of me, moving fast, too fast, like they were running from something. A moment later, I spotted a desert fox doing the same thing, heading in the same direction. Animals don't usually travel together like that. They were all running away from the area I was heading toward. As I rounded the bend in my truck, I spotted the ancient petroglyphs carved into the canyon wall. I'd seen them 100 times before. Images of strange creatures, human figures, and symbols the Navajo elders wouldn't explain to outsiders. But today, in the flickering light of the setting sun, they seemed different. The figures looked like they were moving just slightly, as if breathing. I blinked hard, just a trick of the light. The temperature dropped suddenly, making me shiver. I checked the reading on my truck's display, 48 degrees. It had been 78 just 30 minutes ago. A 30-degree drop in half an hour wasn't normal, even for desert climate. Darkness fell quickly, too quickly, and I flipped on my headlights. The beams cut through the growing darkness, and I could swear I saw shapes moving at the edge of the light. Human shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. A coyote howled somewhere nearby, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. But it didn't sound right. It sounded almost human. Then another joined in, and another, until the howls blended together in a harmony that made the hair on my arms stand up. The smell hit me next. Something rotten beneath the familiar scent of sage and dirt. It smelled like copper and decay, like death. I looked up at the night sky, hoping to see the familiar constellations that usually brought me comfort on nights like this. But something strange was happening. The stars were disappearing one by one, as if something huge was moving across the sky, blocking them out. My headlights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The engine sputtered and died. "Come on," I muttered, turning the key again. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The silence was complete now. No wind, no animals, not even insects. Just my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I swept the flashlight beam across the trail ahead, and that's when I saw it, a single footprint in the dirt. A human footprint, but something was wrong with it. The toes were too long, the arch too high, and it was pointed toward me. I felt something watching me from the darkness beyond my light. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been waiting for me. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. The moment my old life ended and a nightmare began. A nightmare with many faces, including my own. I reached for the FBI badge hanging from a chain around my neck, a habit I couldn't break even though I wasn't an agent anymore. The cool metal reminded me of my old life, the one I left behind after everything fell apart. 3 years ago, I was Special Agent Rebecca Nash, FBI behavioral analyst. Now I'm just Park Ranger Nash, hiding from my past in these canyons. Sometimes I think I ran as far as I could from the concrete and glass of the city, looking for peace in this empty wilderness. But we can't outrun our mistakes, can we? My flashlight beam shook slightly as I turned back toward my truck. I needed to radio for help, but with the communications down, I'd have to wait it out or walk back to my station. Neither option felt good right now. I whistled softly, wishing Kodiak was with me. My German Shepherd usually came on patrols, but he'd been acting strange this morning, refusing to get in the truck, whining at the door. I should have listened to him. Animals know things we don't. Back in the truck, I pulled out my notebook, another habit from my FBI days. I wrote down everything strange I'd noticed. The animals running away, the temperature drop, the weird sounds, the footprint. Putting things on paper helped me think clearly, helped me see patterns others might miss. Some people say I'm obsessive. My old boss at the bureau called it my gift and curse. I see connections everywhere, can't let go of details that don't fit. It made me good at catching killers, until it didn't. The Sandman case broke me. That's what they called him because he left his victims' eyes filled with sand. I built a profile that pointed us in the wrong direction. While we were chasing ghosts, he killed 3 more people, including my partner, Agent Reynolds. I still see Reynolds' face sometimes, asking why I got it wrong, why I let him die. That's when the nightmares started, the panic attacks, the days when I couldn't get out of bed. The bureau suggested a leave of absence. I took a permanent one instead. I flipped through my notebook to the section where I'd been tracking strange happenings around the park. Missing hikers whose camps were found perfectly intact. Strange animal deaths, visitors reporting seeing people who couldn't possibly be there. The locals, especially those from the Navajo reservation, wouldn't talk about it directly. But one elder had pulled me aside last month after a community meeting. "The old ones are waking up," he'd said, his eyes never meeting mine. "The ones who wear borrowed skins." I'd been studying Navajo legends since then, trying to understand what he meant. The stories about skinwalkers, evil witches who could take animal form, were everywhere in their culture. But something about these recent events felt different from the traditional tales. My hand moved to the pistol on my hip. I was still an expert shot, one skill from my FBI training I made sure to maintain. Out here, being a good shot isn't just about protection from 2-legged threats. The radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. "Nash! Nash! Are you there?" I grabbed it quickly. "This is Nash. I'm about 5 miles east of Painted. Truck died. Over. Nothing but static then. Nash, it's coming." The voice sounded strange, distant and hollow. "Repeat last message. Who is this? Over." More static, then something that made my blood run cold. "It's me, Nash." The voice was clearer now. It was my voice. "I'm already here." The radio went dead in my hand. I dropped it like it had burned me. That's when I heard footsteps outside. My truck. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling around to the driver's side door. I raised my pistol, pointing it at the window, my hand steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. The footsteps stopped. Something scraped against the door. Not fingers, something sharper. Then a face appeared in the window. My face, smiling at me with too many teeth. I blinked and it was gone. I needed to get back to my station, back to Kodiak, back to safety. Whatever was happening here in these canyons tonight, I was sure of one thing: I wasn't alone anymore. I managed to get my truck started after a few more tries and drove as fast as I dared back toward my ranger station. The headlights kept flickering, throwing strange shadows across the road, but I made it back just as the moon rose over the canyon rim. Kodiak heard me coming. His deep bark greeted me before I even cut the engine. When I opened the door to my small cabin, he nearly knocked me over, whining and pressing against my legs like he hadn't seen me in days instead of hours. "It's okay, boy," I said, kneeling to rub his ears. "What's got you so worked up?" His amber eyes looked past me into the darkness outside, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. I locked the door and checked all the windows twice. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept seeing that face, my face, smiling at me through the truck window. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. Almost. The radio call came at dawn. A hiker had found an abandoned campsite near Broken Arrow Trail. I grabbed my gear, loaded Kodiak into the truck and headed out. The campsite was neat, too neat. A tent stood perfectly pitched. 2 camp chairs faced the dead fire pit. A cooler sat on the picnic table, still filled with food and ice. But there was no sign of the campers. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Ranger! Anyone here?" Nothing but the wind answered me. Kodiak sniffed around the perimeter, hackles raised. He didn't bark or whine, just stared into the trees with his ears forward. I checked the tent. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, neatly laid out. Beside them, folded with strange precision, were clothes. Jeans, t-shirts, socks, even underwear. As if someone had undressed and folded every item before. What? "Nash to base," I said into my radio, which was working fine now. "I'm at the campsite. No sign. Of the hikers, vehicle is still here, requesting backup to begin search." "Copy that, Nash. Johnson is heading your way. ETA 20 minutes. I decided to look around while waiting. Kodiak followed close at my heels as I circled wider around. The camp. About 50 yards into the trees, he suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought someone had hung sheets out to dry. 3 large, paper-thin shapes hung from the branches of a juniper tree, swaying gently in the breeze. But as I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. Skin, human skin, hanging from the branches like laundry. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to look closer. The skins were complete, from scalp to toes, with holes where eyes, mouth, and other openings should be. They'd been removed in one piece with surgical precision. No blood, no tearing. It was impossible. No one could remove human skin like this. I backed away, pulling out my phone to document the scene. That's when I noticed the ground beneath. The tree. Someone had been digging. "Kodiak, stay," I commanded, approaching what looked like freshly turned earth. 3 shallow graves recently filled in. I hesitated, then used a small folding shovel from my pack to dig into one. I didn't have to dig far. Just 6 inches down, I found bones. Animal bones. Deer, by the look of them, arranged in a human shape. They were dressed in human clothing, a flannel shirt and jeans. The other graves held the same. Animal bones dressed in people's clothes. I was taking photos when Johnson's voice came through on the radio. "Nash, where are you? I'm at the campsite." "In the trees northeast of camp," I replied. "You need to see this." While waiting for Johnson, I noticed Kodiak staring and growling at an empty space between 2 trees. I saw nothing there, but he tracked something with his eyes, something moving. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scanning the area. "What do you see?" "Help me!" The voice, my voice, came from behind me. I spun around, gun drawn. Nothing. "Please, help me!" My voice again, but from a different direction, then another call, another direction. "Nash, over here." And another, "Can you see me, Nash?" My own voice calling from everywhere at once. Johnson appeared through the trees looking confused. "Who were you talking to?" "You didn't hear that?" I asked, my hand still on my gun. "Hear what?" He looked concerned. "You okay, Nash?" Before I could answer, he spotted the skins hanging from the tree and swore loudly. "What the hell is that?" While Johnson called it in, I walked back toward the campsite, trying to make sense of what I'd found. That's when I noticed the footprints, human, prints that suddenly changed mid-stride. The front half of each print was human, but the back half morphed into what looked like animal paws. Back at the ranger station that evening, I reviewed the security camera footage from the trailhead. What I saw made no sense. There I was, walking through the parking lot at 2 a.m. last night, when I had been home in bed. The figure looked exactly like me, same uniform, same walk, same face. It stared directly at the camera and smiled. I checked the logs. 3 hikers had reported speaking with Ranger Nash yesterday on trails where I hadn't been. In my mailbox was a stack of missing person reports. Paperclipped to each one was one of my business cards, cards I hadn't handed out. That night, my radio kept picking up fragments of conversations. My voice, talking to hikers I'd never met, answering questions I'd never been asked. Something was out there pretending to be me. And whatever it was getting better at it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those skins hanging from the tree branches. I kept the lights on and my gun close, while Kodiak paced by the windows, growling at shadows. Morning came with fog hanging over the canyons, unusual for this time of year. I called my supervisor and took a personal day. I needed to figure this out. I spread my notes across the kitchen table. The missing hikers, the strange sightings, the footprints that changed mid-step. None of it made sense, at least not in the world I thought I knew. Around noon, Kodiak's ears perked up. He trotted to the door, tail wagging. "What is it, boy?" I asked, reaching for my gun. Kodiak only wagged his tail like that for people he knew. A knock at the door, 3 sharp raps. I looked through the peephole and felt my heart stop. Agent Reynolds stood on my porch. My partner. My dead partner. "Nash, you in there? Open up." His voice was exactly as I remembered it. It couldn't be him. I'd been at his funeral 3 years ago. I'd seen his body. "Whoever you are," I called through the door, "you need to leave now." A pause. "Nash, it's me. Reynolds. Let me in. We need to talk about the case." Kodiak whined, sniffing at the door crack. He knew Reynolds. They'd been friends. "Reynolds is dead," I said, my voice shaking. "He died 3 years ago." Another pause, then, "I know you think that, but it's complicated. Let me explain." I kept one hand on my gun and slowly opened the door. It was him. Every detail perfect. The small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident. The crooked smile. The way he stood with his weight on his left leg. Even the cologne he always wore. "How?" I whispered. "Can I come in?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "It's not safe out here." Against every instinct, I stepped back. Reynolds, or whatever looked like Reynolds, walked into my cabin. Kodiak greeted him happily, like an old friend. "You look good, Nash," he said, studying my face. "The ranger life suits you better than the bureau did." He knew how Reynolds talked, how he moved, details no stranger could know. "You're not him," I said, keeping my distance. "Reynolds died in Denver, the Sandman case." He nodded slowly. "That's what they told you, part of the cover-up." "What cover-up?" "The things we found in those caves," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "The government couldn't let that information get out, so they faked my death, made me disappear." He knew about the caves, the Sandman's killing grounds that only the investigation team had seen. "Why show up now?" I asked, my gun still in my hand, but lowered now. "Because it followed me here," he said. "The thing we woke up in those caves. and now it's hunting both of us. He walked to my notes on the table, pointing to the photos of the skinned bodies. It takes their faces, Nash, their identities, becomes them. A chill ran through me. What is it? The Navajo call it a skinwalker, but it's older than their stories. It feeds on identity, on the essence of who we are. He looked up at me, and it's gotten better at it over the years. Something felt wrong. Reynolds was saying all the right things, knew all the right details, but something in his eyes seemed empty. Tell me something only Reynolds would know, I said. Something we never put in a report. He smiled, that crooked smile. The night in Albuquerque, after we interviewed the Sandman's third victim's family, you cried in the car. I told you about my sister who died when I was 12, how she looked like the victim. My hand trembled on the gun. That had happened, exactly like that. You see, he said, stepping closer, it's me, Nash. Kodiak suddenly growled, not at Reynolds, but at the window. I glanced over and froze. Reynolds was standing outside, looking in at us. I swung my gun back to the Reynolds, in my cabin, but he moved faster than any human could. His hand caught my wrist, bending it until I dropped the weapon. I was going to draw this out longer, he said, his voice changing, becoming hollow. But now we'll have to speed things up. His face rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. The skin seemed to loosen, revealing something dark and wrong underneath. I've been watching you for weeks, Nash, it said with Reynolds' mouth. Learning everything about you. Your guilt, your fear, your pain. It smiled. Delicious. I fought against its grip, but it was impossibly strong. I know all about you, it continued. The way you blamed yourself for those deaths, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the pills you took to sleep. It knew things even Reynolds hadn't known, private things. I'm going to wear your skin next, it whispered. Live your life, and no one will ever know the difference. Kodiak lunged, teeth bared, but the creature backhanded him across the room without even looking. My dog hit the wall with a yelp and slumped to the floor. The thing wearing Reynolds' face began to change. Its body stretched and shifted. In seconds, I was looking at multiple versions of people I knew. My supervisor Johnson, hikers who had gone missing, and finally, myself. My own face smiled at me with too many teeth. Your memories taste like guilt, it said with my voice. So much pain to feed on. It showed me visions then. The victims I'd failed to save from the Sandman. They stood around us in my cabin, their sand-filled eyes staring accusingly. Reynolds among them, bloody and broken. None of this is real, I gasped, fighting to keep my grip on reality. Isn't it? It asked, and suddenly we were back in those Denver caves, the Sandman standing over his victims. But now I could see something else there too, something dark. Moving behind the killer, guiding his hand. He was mine, the creature said, my puppet, and now you're going to be too. I felt something cold seeping into my mind, planting false memories, making me question what was real and what wasn't. Kodiak growled weakly from across the room. The sound anchored me, gave me something real to hold on to. The creature noticed. That mutt won't save you, it said, turning toward Kodiak. That was its mistake. In that moment of distraction, I dove for my fallen gun. My fingers closed around the gun. Just as the creature turned back toward me, I didn't hesitate. I fired 2 shots directly into its chest. The bullets hit, but it barely flinched. Instead, it laughed with my own voice. You can't kill me that way, Nash, it said, looking down at the holes in Reynolds' shirt. The wounds sealed themselves before my eyes. I'm not alive like you are. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the wall. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. If it could wear people's skins, become them perfectly. You have to kill them first, I whispered as understanding dawned. To become someone, you have to kill them. It smiled, pleased like a teacher whose student finally solved a difficult problem. Very good, it said. I need their essence, their complete identity, and for that, yes, they need to die. That's why Reynolds' imitation was so perfect. It wasn't just copying him, it had consumed him, which meant the real Reynolds truly was dead, just not the way I'd believed. Why me? I asked, trying to buy time as I inched toward the kitchen. Because you're broken, it said simply. The fractured ones taste better, more complex, and you've been running from yourself for so long, you're practically halfway to becoming someone else already. Behind me, Kodiak was slowly getting to his feet, shaking his head groggily. The creature was watching me, but now I noticed something else. A slight shimmer in the air around it, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, and a faint smell of decay beneath Reynolds' cologne. It was maintaining multiple forms at once. I could see flickers of other faces beneath Reynolds, like layers of masks all worn together. That gave me an idea. If you know me so well, I said, then you know I'm good at spotting fakes. Its smile faltered slightly. You've got Reynolds mostly right, I continued, but there are tells. The real Reynolds never stood with his weight on his left leg. He had a right knee injury from college football, and he hated that cologne. His ex-wife gave it to him. I was lying, the details were perfect, but I needed to make it doubt itself. You're stalling, it said, but I could see uncertainty in its eyes. Am I? Or are you just not as good at this as you think? I took a step forward. Show me the others, all the people you're pretending to be. To my surprise, it did. The air around it shimmered more intensely, and suddenly I was facing a crowd of people, all standing in the same spot, layered over each other like double-exposed photographs. Missing hikers, park rangers, local residents, and in the center still the strongest image, Reynolds. Impressive, I said, meaning it, but which one is the real you? Its confidence was wavering. The forms began to shift more rapidly, less controlled. There is no real me, it hissed. I am all of them, and soon I'll be you too. That's when I noticed something. Each time it shifted forms, the shimmering intensified around a spot on its chest, right where a heart would be. A weak point? I had one chance. I glanced at Kodiak and gave the hand signal we'd practiced countless times, the attack command. Kodiak launched himself at the creature just as I dove for the kitchen. I grabbed the can of lighter fluid I used for my grill and my cigarette lighter. The creature roared, a sound no human throat could make, as Kodiak's teeth sank into its arm. It flung my dog aside, harder this time. Kodiak hit the bookshelf with a yelp that cut straight to my heart. I didn't have time to check on him. The creature was coming for me, its form rippling between faces. Enough games, it growled, its voice a blend of dozens of others. I agree, I said, and sprayed the lighter fluid directly at it. The liquid hit its chest and face. Before it could react, I flicked the lighter. Flames erupted instantly, spreading across its body. It screamed, a chorus of voices all crying out at once. The fire seemed to affect it far more than the bullets had. I ran past it, heading for the door. Kodiak, come! My dog struggled to his feet and limped after me. We burst outside into the afternoon sunlight. The creature followed, still burning, its form shifting rapidly between all its stolen identities. As the fire consumed it, I saw flashes of its true form, beneath the human disguises, something ancient and wrong, with too many eyes and limbs that bent in impossible ways. It won't end here, it said, its voices becoming more distorted. There are more of us. The old ones are waking. I backed away, pulling Kodiak with me. Then we'll be ready. The fire was burning hotter now, and I realized why. It was the skins. They were like fuel to it. Each identity it had stolen was burning away. It made one last lunge toward me, its burning hand almost reaching my face, but then it collapsed, the fire consuming it from within. As it died, I saw all the faces it had stolen, their expressions peaceful as they were released. Reynolds was the last to go, his eyes meeting mine for one moment before the flames took him. Then there was nothing but ash blowing away in the desert wind. I sank to my knees beside Kodiak, burying my face in his fur. He whined softly, licking my cheek. "It's okay, boy," I whispered. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not really. That night, after giving my statement to a very confused sheriff's department, I stood in my bathroom, looking at my reflection in the mirror. For a second, just a split second, I saw other faces looking back at me. The missing hikers, the Sandman's victims, Reynolds. I reached up to touch my face, making sure it was still my own. The mirror showed my hand moving in perfect sync, proof it was really me. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a terrible question. Would I even know if it wasn't? I turned away from the mirror and never trusted my reflection again. The creature was gone, but it had left something behind, a seed of doubt that would never fully go away, a fear that the face I wore might not truly be my own. And somewhere in the desert night, carried on the wind, I could hear coyote calls that sounded almost human. My name is Thomas Erickson, and I've seen things in these waters that no man should ever witness. The morning fog rolled across the lake like ghostly fingers, reaching out from the water as I paddled my canoe through the boundary waters. June in Minnesota is usually beautiful, but something felt off today. I could feel it in my bones. I dipped my paddle silently, barely making a ripple as I moved between the islands. This was my job, checking on remote campsites, making sure hikers were safe, that they followed the rules. Simple work for a man trying to escape complicated memories. The call of loons echoed across the water, bouncing off the tall granite. Cliffs that lined the shore. Normally, their cries sounded lonely but peaceful. Today, they seemed like warnings. "That's strange," I muttered to myself, noticing dark patches spreading beneath the surface. The boundary waters were famous for crystal-clear lakes, where you could see 30 feet down, but these patches looked like someone had spilled oil, thick, dark algae blooms that shouldn't be here. I steered my canoe toward a small cove, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of fish floating belly up near the shore. Northern pike, walleye, even sturdy bass. I reached over the side and pulled one from the water. No visible wounds, no sign of disease. Their eyes were cloudy, but not from decay. Something else had killed them. The air felt colder than it should. For June, I pulled out my thermometer and dipped it into the water. 42 degrees. That couldn't be right. I checked again. The reading stayed the same, about 10 degrees colder than normal for this time of year. Curious, I pulled out my depth finder. Modern technology feels out of place in this wilderness, but as a ranger, I need to know these waters. The reading made no sense. The display showed 317 feet. Impossible. I'd studied every map of these lakes. This spot was charted at 60 feet max. I paddled closer to shore, where ancient rock faces rose from the water. Their faded red markings caught my eye. Pictographs left by the Ojibwe people hundreds of years ago. I'd seen plenty of their artwork showing hunters, animals, and spirit beings, but these were different. Long, tentacle-like arms reaching up, from wavy lines representing water. A warning, perhaps, about something that lived in the depths. Further along the shoreline, I noticed a destroyed beaver dam. Shattered sticks and mud scattered as if something massive had burst through it from below. The beaver lodge nearby sat abandoned, its entrance torn wide open. Beavers don't just leave their homes unless something terrifies them. What struck me most was the silence. No ducks paddled in the reeds, no geese honked overhead, no herons waded along the shallows. Perfect nesting conditions, yet not a single. Waterfowl in sight, just the haunting call of loons in the distance. I'd spent 3 years patrolling these waters, and I'd never seen the lake so empty of life. Something was driving everything away, or worse, consuming it. I checked my watch, 9:17 a.m. The fog should have burned off by now, but instead it seemed to be getting thicker, closing in around my canoe like a living thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from below, that something vast and ancient had awakened in these waters, and I was right. God help me, I was right. People back at the ranger station joke that I'm more comfortable in water than on land. Maybe they're right. I reached into my pocket and ran my fingers over my old Navy dive watch. The glass was cracked and it hadn't kept time in years, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Next to it was a folded photo of my submarine. Grew 25 faces smiling in the sunlight before we went down into the darkness. Before 23 of them never came back up. I was one of the lucky ones, they said, a deep water specialist on a nuclear submarine during the Cold War. We were testing new depths when something went wrong. The pressure crushed part of the hull. Water rushed in, screams, darkness. I still hear them in my dreams. The doctors call it survivor's guilt. They gave me pills that I don't take. Instead, I came here, as far from the ocean as I could get while still being near water. Freshwater lakes seemed safer somehow. Smaller, more contained. How wrong I was. My canoe bumped against a fallen tree, snapping me back to the present. I paddled toward the shore and pulled my boat onto a small beach. From my backpack, I took out a thermos of coffee, pouring some into the cap. It was bitter and strong, just like I needed it to be after another night of broken sleep. Linda had called again last night from Duluth. She wanted me to come see our baby girl, now 6 months old. I'd only held her twice. Each time my hands shook so badly I was afraid I'd drop her. "You need to be part of her life, Tom," Linda had said. "I know what happened on that submarine. It was terrible, but you can't hide up in those woods forever." Maybe she was right. But the woods didn't judge me. The lakes didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. I checked my gear, force of habit from my Navy days. The military-grade diving equipment I kept with me was probably overkill for freshwater rescue operations, but I liked being prepared. The underwater comm unit, the emergency lights, the extra tanks, all meticulously maintained. After 15 years in the Navy, I knew water better than most people know their own homes. These boundary waters contain over 1,100 lakes, and in 3 years as a ranger, I'd mapped most of them in my head. Every depth, every current, every underwater cave, or so I thought. A bark from the trees announced Anchor's arrival. My black lab came bounding down to the shore, a stick in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, tail wagging. "Where'd you run off to, buddy?" I scratched behind his ears. Anchor was the one living thing I felt completely comfortable with. He didn't care about my past or my nightmares. He just wanted to swim and chase sticks and sleep at the foot of my bed. I threw the stick into the shallows. Usually Anchor would splash in after it without hesitation. This time he stopped at the water's edge. His ears went back and he let out a low growl. "What's wrong, boy? Go get it." He whined and backed away from the water, something I'd never seen him do before. This was a dog who would swim in half-frozen lakes in November without hesitation. I reached for the bottle of whiskey in my pack, my nightly medicine against the dreams of crushing darkness and the faces of my drowned crewmates. I'd been drinking more lately. Too much. It was the only way I could sleep without seeing their bloated faces calling me from the deep. I put the bottle back without opening it. Something was wrong with these lakes, and I needed a clear head. My radio crackled with static, the ranger station checking in. "Erickson, you copy? Got some campers reported missing near Jackfish Bay. Family of 4 didn't check in last night." I pressed the button. "Copy that. I'm about 2 hours from there. I'll head that way now." "Thanks, Tom. Let us know what you find." I whistled for Anchor and pushed my canoe back into the water. He jumped in reluctantly, still watching the surface with suspicious eyes. As I paddled away from shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited for me at Jackfish Bay was connected to the dead fish, the cold water, and the impossible depth readings. Something was changing these lakes from below. Something that understood water and pressure in ways that defied explanation, and deep down, in the part of my mind still trapped in a crushed submarine, I was terrified of what I might find. The paddle dipped rhythmically into the water as I made my way toward Jackfish Bay. The morning fog had lifted, but dark clouds now hung low, promising rain. Anchor sat at the front of the canoe, his body tense, eyes fixed on the water's surface. By noon, I reached the campsite where the family had been staying. What I found made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 3 tents stood in a neat row, perfectly staked. A cooler sat on the picnic table. Fishing poles leaned against a tree. Everything was arranged as if the campers had just stepped away for a moment, but no one was there. I called out, "Hello? Ranger Service, anyone here?" Only the wind through the pines answered me. Inside the main tent, I found backpacks unpacked, sleeping bags laid out. A children's book lay open beside a small flashlight. A half-played card game spread across a camp mat. No signs of animals or struggle, no tracks leading away from camp. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. "This isn't right," I muttered to Anchor, who refused to leave my side. "People don't just disappear." I radioed back to the station to report what I'd found. They'd send more rangers, maybe a search party with dogs. But something told me they wouldn't find anything. Not on land, anyway. I walked to the edge of the water. The lake bottom near the shore had been disturbed, not in the way swimmers or boats might stir it up, but as if something massive had moved through the soft mud. Wide, sweeping patterns like those made by something bigger than any fish these lakes had ever held. Anchor wouldn't go near the water. He stood back from the shore, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What do you see, boy?" I asked, knowing he wouldn't answer. "But animals sense things we can't. That's why miners used to bring canaries into coal mines. When the birds stopped singing, you knew trouble was coming." My dive watch had stopped working years ago, but I still wore it every day. Now, something impossible happened. The depth gauge on its side, broken since the submarine accident, suddenly spun wildly, as if detecting massive pressure changes. But I was standing on dry land. I pulled out my equipment and checked the digital pressure meter. It jumped between readings. That made no sense, showing depths of over 600 feet, then back to normal atmospheric pressure, then deep again. Equipment malfunction, I told myself. Had to be. Near the shore, something white caught my eye. Tangled in a fishing net that had washed up was what looked like driftwood. But we don't get driftwood in these lakes. Not like this. I knelt down and felt my stomach turn. Not wood, bone, human bone, bleached white as if it had been underwater for years. But these bones seemed wrong somehow, compressed, as if they'd been subjected to enormous pressure. I'd seen similar effects on deep-sea divers who suffered catastrophic equipment failures. My radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't the ranger station. Through bursts of static I heard what sounded like a distress call, a voice thin and watery repeating coordinates. I checked my map. The coordinates were for a point in the middle of Jackfish Lake, the deepest part where no one should be. The clouds grew darker and the wind picked up. I needed to check those coordinates, but everything inside me screamed to get back to the ranger station, to solid ground, to safety. I collected water samples from different parts of the lake. Through my small field microscope, I saw things that shouldn't exist in fresh water. Organisms that looked more like deep-sea creatures, with bioluminescent organs and transparent bodies. That's when I noticed the trees along the shoreline. Water. Damage marked their trunks about 20 feet above the current water level. But the lakes hadn't flooded recently. There had been no rain heavy enough to raise the water that high. Unless something else had moved the water, lifted it, controlled it. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings before heading to those coordinates. The needle spun wildly when I pointed it toward the center of the lake, like it was detecting a powerful magnetic field. "Come on, Anchor," I said, pushing the canoe back into the water. "We need to check this out." For the first time ever, Anchor refused to get into the boat. He barked frantically, backing away from the water's edge. "Fine," I said. "Stay here, guard the camp." As I paddled away from shore, I noticed something else wrong. The currents pulled in directions they shouldn't. In places, the water flowed uphill, defying gravity. Small whirlpools formed and disappeared randomly. The lake was behaving like a living thing. About halfway to the coordinates, the sky darkened completely, though it was only mid-afternoon. The wind died suddenly, leaving the lake surface mirror smooth. Too smooth. Unnatural. I dipped my paddle in and felt resistance, as if the water had thickened to syrup. The temperature dropped further. My breath fogged in front of my face. From the shore, I heard Anchor barking frantically. I turned to look, back and froze. The water behind my canoe was rising, not in waves, but in a column, like a liquid tower stretching toward the sky. As I watched, the column began to take shape. I should have turned back then, should have paddled for shore as fast as I could. But I was frozen in place, unable to look away as the water formed into something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, something that had been waiting for me. The water rose higher, shaping itself into a form that towered 15 feet. Above the lake's surface, it looked almost human, but wrong in every way. A giant made of lake water, weeds and mud. Light pulsed inside it like fireflies trapped in ice, glowing organs visible through its see-through skin. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My paddle slipped from my fingers. The thing, the drowned god, I would later come to call it, stood on the surface of the lake as if it were solid ground. Where its feet touched the water, whirlpools formed, spinning faster and faster. Then it spoke. Thomas. Not one voice, but many, layered over each other. Men, women, children, all speaking together with the gurgling sound of water filling lungs. "We've been waiting for you." How did it know my name? My canoe began to spin, caught in a current I couldn't fight. The water around me bubbled and churned as if boiling, yet remained ice cold. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice a pathetic whisper against the roar of water. The creature tilted what passed for its head. "We are all who have entered the depths, all who have surrendered to the pressure, all who have given themselves to the water." From the shore, Anchor's barking grew frantic. I turned to see him pacing at the water's edge, desperate, but too afraid to swim out to me. When I looked back at the creature, its form had changed. Now it wore a face I recognized, Chief Petty Officer Davis, who had been standing next to me when the submarine hull cracked. His eyes had been the last thing I saw before the emergency lights kicked on. "You left us down there, Thomas," said the thing with Davis's face. "You swam away while we drowned." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not how it happened. I tried to save you. I tried—" The face changed again, becoming Martinez, then Wilson, then each of my dead crewmates in turn. 23 faces, all accusing me with dead eyes. "Join us, Thomas. The pressure isn't so bad once you give in to it." Behind the creature, the water rose in more columns, more shapes forming, human-like figures made of water. With a shock of horror, I recognized the missing family from the campsite. 2 adults, 2 children, their features blurred but recognizable, moving with jerky puppet motions. My training kicked in. Navy divers don't panic even when everything goes wrong. I reached for my emergency flare gun and fired a shot high into the air. The red light burst above us, reflecting off the water and the creature's shimmering form. It laughed, a terrible sound like people drowning. "No one will come, Thomas. No one can help you now." The water around my canoe began to rise, forming a ring that slowly closed in. I searched desperately for something to use as a weapon, knowing, even as I did, that you can't fight water with physical tools. From the shore, I heard a splash. Anchor had overcome his fear and leaped into the lake, swimming frantically toward me, fighting against currents that shouldn't exist. "No, Anchor, go back," I shouted. but it was too late. The water between us formed into tentacle-like arms that wrapped around my dog, pulling him under, then lifting him high into the air. Anchor yelped and struggled as water filled his mouth. "Let him go!" I screamed, standing up in the canoe. "He's innocent. This is between you and me." The creature tilted its head again, curious. "You care for this animal more than the humans you left to die." "I didn't leave anyone to die," I said through gritted teeth. "It was an accident. The hull breach—" "There are no accidents in the depths," the creature interrupted. "Only the pressure revealing what was always weak." My canoe tipped suddenly, dumping me into the freezing water. I expected to sink, but instead, currents caught me, holding me suspended just below the surface, unable to swim up or down. The creature moved closer, its watery body towering over me. It reached out with arms that became more solid as they neared me, transforming from water to something like flesh, cold, slippery flesh that had never seen sunlight. "We will show you the truth beneath, Thomas Eriksson, the truth you've been running from." The water around me began to spin, faster and faster, forming a whirlpool that pulled me down. I fought against it, using every swimming technique I knew, but it was like fighting a hurricane. As I was dragged deeper, I saw Anchor still struggling in the creature's grasp. With one desperate effort, my dog broke free and tried to swim toward me. The creature let him go, watching with what seemed like amusement as Anchor battled the same currents pulling me down. My lungs began to burn. I needed air. But the surface was now a distant circle of light above me, growing smaller by the second. The pressure increased. My ears popped painfully. I was being pulled down faster than was safe for a human body, with no time to equalize the pressure. It felt like my head would explode. Through the pain and growing darkness, I saw the creature had followed me down, its glowing organs providing the only light in the deepening gloom. It moved through water as easily as air, splitting into multiple forms that surrounded me, now appearing as my dead crewmates, now as the missing family, now as strangers I didn't recognize, but somehow knew had drowned in these lakes over the centuries. "The depths have always been here, Thomas," the voices gurgled around me, "waiting for those who belong to the pressure." My vision began to tunnel. My lungs screamed for air. I was going to die here, dragged into the impossible depths of a lake that should be shallow, claimed by a creature that shouldn't exist. Just before I blacked out, I felt something bump against my side. Anchor had reached me, pushing his body under mine, trying to lift me toward the surface. My faithful dog, fighting to save me even as I failed to save him. With the last of my strength, I grabbed hold of his collar. Together, we kicked toward the distant light above. The creature's laugh echoed around us, not chasing, but simply waiting, confident we couldn't escape. "We'll be here when you return, Thomas. The depths are patient. The pressure is eternal." My consciousness faded as Anchor pulled me upward. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was my dog's eyes, determined and loyal to the end, even as the unnatural currents tried to drag us both down to the waiting darkness below. I woke up coughing water, sprawled on a rocky shore. Somehow, Anchor had dragged me to land. My faithful dog stood nearby, shivering, his black coat slick with water. He whined softly when he saw my eyes open. "Good boy," I whispered, my throat raw. "You saved me." The sky had darkened to evening. How long had I been unconscious? My watch, my regular watch, not my old Navy one, said it was nearly 7 p.m. I'd lost hours. I tried to stand, but collapsed back. Down, pain shooting through my legs. My body felt wrong, like I'd been squeezed by a giant hand. I recognized the symptoms from my Navy training, decompression sickness, the bends. But that was impossible in a lake. You'd need to dive hundreds of feet to risk the bends, and these lakes weren't, except they were. Something had changed them, made them deeper, created pressure that shouldn't exist. The drowned god, the creature of water and light, It wasn't a hallucination or a dream. It was real, and it was still out there, waiting. I crawled to my backpack, which had somehow stayed with me. Inside was my emergency radio, thankfully waterproof. But when I tried to call for help, only static answered. We were on our own. "Come on, Anchor," I said, struggling to my feet. "We need to move." We couldn't go back across the water. The creature controlled the lake, probably all the lakes. It could appear anywhere there was enough water. Our only chance was to hike out through the forest, back to the ranger station. But I couldn't leave those people, the missing family, maybe others, to whatever fate the creature had planned for them. I'd already failed to save my crewmates. I couldn't fail again. I dug deeper in my pack and found what I was looking for, my demolition kit, another leftover from my Navy days that I'd never quite let go of. Small charges, a timer, a detonator, designed for underwater use. An idea formed. The creature seemed most powerful when it materialized above water, when it took solid form. But it had to return to the depths. It lived down there, in those impossible caverns that shouldn't exist. If I could find where it dwelled and seal it in. "This is crazy," I told Anchor, who watched me with worried eyes. "But we can't let that thing keep taking people." I waited until full dark, letting my body recover as much as possible. The pain in my joints was still there, but I could move. In the distance, I could see lights, the search party from the ranger station looking for me and the missing family. They had no idea what they were walking into. I wrote a quick note explaining what I'd found and what I planned to do, stuffed it in a waterproof bag, and tied it to Anchor's collar. "Find the rangers," I told him, pointing toward the distant lights. "Go on, boy. Get help." For once, Anchor didn't listen. He stayed by my side, determined not to leave me. "Fine," I sighed. "We do this together." I gathered my diving gear, tank, mask, lights, and the demolition kit. If my theory was right, the creature returned to underwater caves. Deep caves that shouldn't exist in these lakes but somehow did now. I'd need to find them. The lake was calm as I waded in, deceptively peaceful under the moonlight. Anchor followed, swimming beside me until it got too deep. Then he returned to shore, watching anxiously. I fitted my mask and turned on my diving light. The water was clearer now, as if the creature wanted me to see what waited below. I took a deep breath and dove. The underwater landscape had changed completely. Where there should have been a gentle slope to a shallow bottom, there was now a steep drop-off that plunged into darkness. My light couldn't reach the bottom. I swam down, equalizing the pressure in my ears every few feet. The pain from my earlier bout with decompression sickness flared, but I pushed through it. 20 feet, 40, 60, deeper than this lake had any right to be. At 100 feet, I found what I was looking for, a dark opening in the rock face, a cave entrance. I swam closer, shining my light inside. The tunnel continued downward at a steep angle. I checked my air gauge. I had enough. For about 30 minutes at this depth. It would have to be enough. I swam into the tunnel, placing small charges along the roof as I went. The plan was simple. Get deep enough to find where the creature dwelled, set the charges to collapse the tunnel, then get out before detonation. The tunnel widened into a large cavern. My light couldn't reach the other side, but what I could see made my blood run cold. The walls were lined with objects, clothes, backpacks, watches, jewelry, belongings of the creature's victims. In the center of the cavern floor was a depression filled with a substance that wasn't quite water and wasn't quite solid. A swirling, glowing mass that pulsed like a heartbeat. The home of the drowned god. As I watched, the mass began to rise, taking shape. The creature had sensed me. I quickly placed the last charges around the tunnel entrance and set the timer for 3 minutes. Enough time to get out if I swam fast. "Thomas," the watery voices called. "You've come to join us after all." The creature rose higher, its form massive in the confines of the cavern. Behind it I saw shapes moving, human shapes made of the same glowing water. Let them go, I said. Though underwater my voice was just bubbles, somehow the creature understood anyway. They are part of us now, it replied, as you will be. The water around me suddenly changed, the pressure increasing to crushing levels. My dive suit compressed painfully against my skin. Warning alarms on my equipment blared in my ears. The creature showed me visions. Linda and my baby daughter walking into these waters, sinking below the surface, joining the collected souls of the drowned. I knew it was trying to break me, to make me give up. Not this time. I'd lost too many people already. I hit the detonator timer and kicked hard for the tunnel. The creature reached for me with liquid arms that solidified as they touched me, trying to drag me back. I fought against the grip, against the pressure, against the pain in my oxygen-starved muscles. The tunnel seemed longer on the way out, narrower. My air was running dangerously low. The creature's laughter followed me, echoing off the stone walls. The depths are patient, Thomas. If not today, then tomorrow. If not you, then those you love. I broke free of the tunnel just as the first charge detonated. The shockwave hit me like a truck, sending me tumbling through the water. More explosions followed, each one shaking the lake floor. Rock and debris filled the water behind me. The tunnel collapsed, sealing the creature in its cavern. At least for now. My air was almost gone. The surface seemed impossibly far away. My vision began to darken at the edges. Then something grabbed me. Anchor, my brave dog, diving deeper than any dog should be able to, seizing my dive suit in his teeth and pulling me upward. Together, we broke the surface. I gasped for air, filling my burning lungs. Anchor whined and pushed against me, helping me towards shore. We collapsed on the rocks, both of us exhausted beyond measure. In the distance, flashlight beams bounced through the trees, the search party getting closer. I looked back at the lake. The surface was calm again, but I knew what waited below. The charges had sealed the cave, but for how long? What was 3 minutes of explosion against something that had existed in these waters for centuries? 3 days later, I sat in a hospital bed in Duluth. The doctors couldn't explain my symptoms. The worst case of decompression sickness they'd ever seen in someone who claimed to have been diving in a shallow lake. They didn't believe my story about a creature made of water, about impossible depths, about a family turned to liquid puppets. No bodies were ever recovered from Jackfish Lake. The official report listed the family as missing, presumed drowned. My report was filed away as the ravings of a man suffering from oxygen deprivation and trauma. Anchor stayed by my hospital bed day and night. The nurses tried to shoo him out, but he growled at anyone who came between us. They gave up eventually. Linda came to visit, bringing our daughter. This time I held her without shaking. Nearly dying has a way of putting things in perspective. "Come home, Tom," Linda said. "Whatever happened out there, whatever you're running from, it's time to come back to us." I nodded, but didn't tell her that I wasn't running anymore. I was planning, researching, learning everything I could about the legends of water spirits in the boundary waters. The Ojibwe had known about the creature for centuries. They called it the dark water spirit, and they stayed away from certain lakes that they said were hungry. I was discharged a week later. The rangers offered me my job back, but I declined. I couldn't go back to those waters, not yet, not until I was ready. The lakes remain unnaturally cold and deep. Fishermen report strange currents, equipment malfunctions, fish disappearing overnight. The local tribes have formally requested that certain areas be declared off-limits to visitors. So far, the Park Service has refused. Sometimes at night, I wake up gasping, feeling water filling my lungs. In my dreams, I hear the creature's voice. The depths are patient, Thomas. And I know it's still there, waiting, gathering strength, reaching out through the connected waterways, spreading its influence. I keep my diving equipment ready, my demolition kit stocked. Next time, I'll be better prepared. because there will be a next time. The pressure is eternal, but so is my resolve. I left 23 crewmates in the crushing depths of the ocean. I won't let this creature take anyone else. The drowned guard and I aren't finished with each other. Not by a long shot. My name is David Crowfeather. I'm a park ranger here in Olympic National Forest, and I've been working these woods for almost 10 years now. I'm 33 years old and proud to be Quinault. These forests have been my people's home for generations. But what I saw last October changed me forever. It was getting dark as I started my night patrol. Storm clouds were rolling in, but something felt off. No smell of rain in the air. Just nothing. The huge old Douglas fir trees around me creaked and groaned in the wind, like they were trying to warn me about something. I clicked on my flashlight, but the beam seemed weak, like the darkness was eating it up. It barely cut through the shadows between the trees. I had my grandfather's cedar bark torch with me too. He gave it to me years ago, saying someday I might need its sacred light. That night, the flame danced in strange ways, almost like it was afraid. As I walked deeper into the forest, I noticed something strange. There were elk and deer tracks everywhere, but they all pointed the same way, out of the forest, like they were running from something. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen animals flee like that without a reason. Then I saw it for the first time. The shadows. They weren't behaving like normal shadows should. They seemed to stretch toward me, like fingers trying to grab my ankles. I blinked hard and looked again. Maybe I was just tired. But no. They moved. Again, reaching for me when the wind wasn't even blowing. Get a grip, David, I whispered to myself. With each cloud that passed overhead, the air got colder. Not the normal kind of cold that comes with a storm, but a bone-deep chill that seemed to flow from the darkness itself. The medicine pouch I wear, the one my grandmother made for me, felt heavy against my chest. Inside were sacred herbs and small tokens for protection. That night, it seemed to pulse with warmth, like the protective spirits inside were stirring, trying to warn me. From all around me came the calls of ravens, caw, 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 echoing from every direction. But when I looked up, I couldn't see a single bird, not one. Ravens don't call at night unless something disturbs them. I stopped and shined my flashlight between a stand of ancient cedars. The darkness there looked different, thicker somehow, more solid than shadow should be, like you could reach out and touch it, or worse, like it could reach out and touch you. I've been afraid in these woods before, of bears, of getting lost, of storms. But that night, for the first time, I was afraid of the dark itself. And I was right to be afraid. The darkness was hungry, and it was watching me. I touched the bone necklace at my throat, the one that belonged to my great-grandfather. It always gave me strength when I felt uneasy. In my pocket I carried a small bundle of dried sage. Some of the other rangers made fun of me for it, but I knew better. The old ways still matter out here. I was taught two kinds of knowledge growing up. My school teachers taught me about trees, wildlife, and how to manage the forest with science. But my tribal elders taught me about the spirits of this land, the unseen things that live alongside us. That's why the Park Service hired me. I understand both worlds. Lately, my mind had been heavy with thoughts of my brother James. We grew up doing everything together, fishing, hunting, playing in these same woods. But only I came home from Vietnam 3 years ago. Sometimes I still hear his voice when the wind blows through the pines. The doctors call it survivor's guilt. I call it a reminder that I'm still here for a reason. My wife, Mary, was probably putting our twin daughters to bed right now, back in our little house on the reservation. I pictured their faces, Sarah and Lily, both 7 years old with their mother's smile and my stubborn chin. I needed to make it home to them. They were the reason I kept going each day. I've always been good at reading signs in the forest. My grandfather taught me how to spot things others miss. A bent twig, disturbed moss, the way animals change their patterns when something's wrong. But he also taught me to watch for other signs, the kind that warn of dangers most people don't believe in anymore. That night, I carried my standard Park Service rifle, but also a bone-handled knife that had been blessed by our tribal medicine. Man, some threats can't be stopped with bullets alone. The elders say that metal forged with prayers can turn away evil spirits. I hoped they were right. The old stories my grandmother told me by the fire came flooding back. Tales of shadow spirits, that hunger for the warmth of human life. Beings that could slip between this world and the spirit world, feeding on fear and suffering. I always thought they were just stories to keep children from wandering off alone. Now I wasn't so sure. Living between two worlds isn't easy. Most days, I'm just Ranger Crow Feather, filing reports and helping lost hikers. But to my tribe, I'm also a guardian of sacred places, someone who remembers the old stories and keeps the old promises. That night, those two parts of me were both on high alert. A soft whine from beside me brought me back to the present. Spirit, my German shepherd, pressed against my leg. The Park Service trained him to find lost hikers and detect wildlife, but my uncle, a tribal shaman, taught him to sense other things too. Right now, his ears were flat against his head, and he wouldn't look into the darkness between the trees. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, resting my hand on his head. He whined again, but didn't move forward. I took a deep breath. Whatever was happening in these woods tonight, I had a job to do. People came to this forest, hikers, campers, families. They didn't know the dangers. They couldn't see the signs. It was my responsibility to protect them, just as it was my duty to guard the sacred places of my ancestors. "Come on, Spirit," I said, clicking my tongue. "We've got work to do." But as we moved deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and hungry was watching us from the shadows, and it was getting closer with every step. About an hour into my patrol, I came across a campsite that shouldn't have been empty. According to the park log, the Johnson family, Mom, Dad, and 2 teenage kids, had checked in yesterday for a 3-day stay. Their blue tent was still there. Their cooler sat on the picnic table. Even their car was parked nearby, but there was no sign of the Johnsons. I called out their names, but only the wind answered back. Spirit sniffed around the campsite, a tail low. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. 4 sleeping bags were laid out neatly. One was still warm. A book lay open, face down, like someone had just put it down to step outside for a minute. A cell phone sat charging on a portable battery pack. The family's hiking boots were all there, lined up by the tent door. People don't just vanish without their shoes. "Hello, Park Ranger, is anyone here?" I shouted again. Nothing looked wrong. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No torn clothing. It was like the family had simply disappeared. I turned to Spirit. "Find them, boy. Search." He put his nose to the ground, circled the camp twice, then stopped at the edge of the clearing. He looked into the darkest part of the forest, growled low in his throat, then backed up, his tail tucked between his legs. "What's wrong, Spirit?" I'd never seen him refuse to track before. I pointed my flashlight where he was looking, but the beams seemed dimmer than before. I checked the batteries. I'd put in fresh ones just before. My shift. They shouldn't be dying already. I walked to the edge of the clearing and found something strange. A perfect circle of withered plants, about 6 feet across. The grass, ferns, and wildflowers inside the circle were brown and dried out, like they'd been dead for weeks, but the plants just inches away were still green and healthy. And the strangest thing? The dead circle was right where the shadows were deepest. I moved closer to a big Douglas fir and noticed odd marks on its bark. Dark burns in the shape of handprints, like someone with burning hands had grabbed the tree. But these weren't normal burn marks. They were cold to the touch, and they formed a pattern that looked like fingers reaching upward. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small pouch of sacred tobacco my grandmother had given me. When things feel wrong in the forest, the old ones say to make an offering. I sprinkled a pinch of tobacco on the ground and whispered a quick prayer. The tobacco burst into flame the moment it hit the shadow. I jumped back, heart pounding. Tobacco doesn't just catch fire on its own. I'd seen many strange things in these woods, but nothing like this. My radio crackled to life, making me nearly jump out of my skin. Through the static I heard a voice, soft, speaking in our tribal language. It sounded like my grandmother, but she'd passed away 3 winters ago. "Beware the hunger that walks in darkness," the voice whispered. Then the radio went dead. I tried to call into headquarters, but got nothing but static. I was on my own. That's when I noticed the shadows on the ground. They looked like people, tall ones, short ones, some the size of children. But when I looked around, there was nothing casting those shadows, nothing at all. The darkness between the trees seemed to pulse like it had a heartbeat. It grew deeper and thicker as the last bit of daylight faded from the sky. And it seemed to be spreading, reaching out from the spaces between trees, flowing like water, across the forest floor. I backed up toward the campsite, keeping my flashlight pointed at the darkness, spirit pressed against my leg, trembling. "It's okay, boy," I said, but my voice shook. "We're going to be okay." But I didn't believe my own words, because for the first time in my life, I could feel the darkness watching me, hungry, waiting, and I knew the Johnsons weren't coming back. I backed away from the edge of the clearing, keeping my eyes on those strange moving shadows. Spirit stayed close to my side, his fur standing on end. That's when I saw it. Between 2 ancient cedar trees, the darkness began to gather, not like normal shadow, but like thick black smoke twisting and turning in on itself. It grew taller, wider, taking shape like a person made of living darkness. I couldn't move. My feet felt frozen to the ground as I watched the shadow form into something almost human. It had arms, legs, and what looked like a head, but its edges kept shifting and flowing like ink in water. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The shadow thing moved closer. It didn't walk. It glided, leaving trails of darkness behind it. The air around it felt ice cold, and my breath came out in white puffs. Then it spoke, not with one voice, but with many voices layered on top of each other. Men, women, children, all speaking at once. "We hunger." Among those voices, I heard one that made my blood freeze. My brother James's voice, exactly as it sounded, the last time I spoke to him before he shipped out to Vietnam. "James," I whispered. The shadow thing rippled, and for a second I saw my brother's face form in the darkness, his eyes, his smile, before it melted back into the writhing blackness. "Join us, brother," it said, using only James's voice now. "It doesn't hurt. Nothing hurts here in the dark." I knew it wasn't really James. My brother was gone. This thing was using his voice, his memories to trick me. "You're not my brother," I said, my voice stronger now. "What are you?" The shadow expanded, growing taller than the trees around us. "We are the hunger that waits between stars. We are the cold between worlds. We are the shadow that feeds." As it spoke, the darkness around us seemed to deepen. My flashlight beam grew dimmer until it was just a faint glow, barely cutting through the blackness. The shadow thing reached out with arms that stretched impossibly long, touching nearby trees. Where it touched, the bark blackened and withered. I tried to back away, but suddenly found myself surrounded by false shadows, patches of darkness that hadn't been there before. They formed a circle around me and Spirit, cutting off any escape. The shadow thing showed me things, terrible visions, floating in its darkness. I saw my twin daughters, Sarah and Lily, their small faces frozen in fear as shadows wrapped around them, pulling them into blackness. I knew it was trying to scare me, to feed on my fear. "They're safe," I said, more to myself than to the creature. "That's not real." Spirit growled beside me, then suddenly yelped in pain. A tendril of shadow had touched his back leg. Before my eyes, my strong young dog began to age. his muzzle turning grey, his clear eyes clouding over, his muscles shrinking as years of life were pulled from him in seconds. I yanked him away from the shadow's touch. He whimpered and pressed. Against me, suddenly old and frail. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, anger replacing my fear. The shadow that called itself the shadow that feeds rippled again. "We have always fed here, long before your people came. The old ones knew us. They feared us. They respected us. They left us offerings." "The missing hikers, the Johnson family. Did you take them?" The shadow thing seemed to smile, though it had no face. "They feed us now. Their fear was sweet. Their life force sustains us. Let them go," I said, knowing, even as I spoke, that it was too late. "They are part of us now, as your brother is part of us, as you will be." The shadow expanded again, reaching for me. I could feel its cold touch even before it made contact, like all the warmth and hope was being pulled out of me. I knew then that I was facing something ancient and powerful, something that had been feeding in these woods for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, something my ancestors had known about and feared. The shadow that feeds was real, and it was hungry for more. As the shadow creature reached for me, my grandfather's cedar bark torch flared suddenly brighter. The shadow thing pulled back, hissing like water on hot coals. That's when I remembered the old stories. The shadow spirits feared fire, not regular fire, but sacred fire lit with prayers and purpose. I held the torch higher, and the circle of shadows around me shrank back. "Fire," I whispered. "You're afraid of the light." The shadow that feeds rippled angrily. "Your artificial lights mean nothing. We consume them. But the old fire, the fire of your ancestors, it burns us." I had a chance. A small one, but better than nothing. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and pulled out my lighter and the small bag of sacred herbs I always carried. I needed to make more fire, fast. The shadow creature sensed what I was doing and lashed out, sending tendrils of darkness toward me from all directions. I dodged, nearly falling as Spirit pressed against my legs. "Run, Spirit, go!" I shouted, but my loyal dog wouldn't leave me. I grabbed a fallen branch and wrapped my bandana around one end. With shaking hands, I lit the cloth with my lighter, then added some of the dried cedar and sage from my pouch. The flame caught, small at first, then growing as I whispered the prayer my grandmother had taught me. "Light of my ancestors, protect me from the hungry dark." The shadow thing screamed, a terrible sound of many voices crying out at once. It retreated a few feet, its edges seeming less solid now. I knew I needed to reach the sacred grove, a circle of ancient cedars about half a mile deeper in the forest. The tribal elders said it was a place of power, where the veil between worlds was thin and spirits of our ancestors could hear us more clearly. "Come on, Spirit," I said, helping my now elderly dog to his feet. "We have to move." With a torch in each hand, I began walking backward, keeping my eyes on the shadow creature. It followed, staying just beyond the reach of my firelight, watching with darkness where eyes should be. Every few steps, I had to stop and light another branch. The shadows around me were alive now, reaching for my feet, trying to trip me. They extinguished my torches faster than normal, forcing me to keep making new ones. The shadow that feeds spoke again, this time using the voices of the Johnson family. "Help us, Ranger. It's so cold in here, so dark." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm going to stop this thing so it can't take anyone else." As we got closer to the sacred grove, the shadow attacks grew more desperate. Black tendrils shot out from between trees trying to grab me. One caught my arm, and instantly I felt years of my life being drained away. Pain shot through my body as my skin wrinkled and my joints ached. I yanked free and kept moving now, feeling decades older. My hair had streaks of gray that hadn't been there before. Finally, we reached the grove. 7 ancient cedar trees stood in a perfect circle around a small clearing carpeted with soft moss. Even on this dark night, the air here felt different, cleaner, safer somehow. I stepped into the center of the circle and placed my remaining torch in the ground. Spirit collapsed beside it, his breathing labored, his once strong body now frail with unnatural age. The shadow that feeds hovered at the edge of the grove, unable or unwilling to enter the sacred space. "You cannot hide in there forever," it hissed. "When your fire dies, we will feast." I knew it was right. I needed to do more than just hide. I needed to fight back. I knelt in the center of the grove and began the cleansing ritual I'd been taught as a boy. I sprinkled sacred tobacco, cedar, and sage in the 4 directions, calling on the spirits of my ancestors for help. As I worked, the shadow creature circled the grove, testing for weaknesses. It sent small tendrils of darkness creeping across the ground toward me. I had to keep stopping the ritual to light new torches and drive the shadows back. Then I realized what I had to do. According to the old stories, these shadow beings couldn't be killed. They could only be banished, and to banish them required a sacrifice. The shadow creature seemed to sense my thoughts. It changed tactics, becoming smaller, taking the shape of my brother James. "Don't do it, David," it said in his voice. "Stay with me. We can be together again." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "You're not my brother." The false James reached out a hand made of shadow. "Part of him is here, inside us. Part of all those we've taken." For a moment, I hesitated. What if some small part of James really was trapped in there? That moment of doubt was all it needed. The shadow lunged forward, latching onto my own shadow where it fell across the ground. Instantly, I felt a terrible cold spreading up from my feet. The shadow was trying to possess me by merging with my shadow. I fell to my knees as darkness crept up my legs, turning my skin gray and lifeless. The shadow that feeds was laughing now, using all its voices at once. "Your light dies. Your fire fades. Your shadow is ours." With the last of my strength, I reached for my knife, the bone-handled one blessed by our tribal medicine man. I knew what I had to sacrifice. "I give up my darkness," I whispered, "so that others may live in the light." I plunged the knife into the ground, pinning my own shadow in place. As the blade cut through my shadow, I felt something tear inside me, not physical, but spiritual. A connection breaking. Light exploded from the knife, spreading outward in a wave. The shadow that feeds screamed and began to dissolve, its darkness peeling away like smoke in a strong wind. "We will return," it promised as it faded. "In the darkness always returns." "But not today," I said. When it was over, I collapsed beside Spirit. The forest was quiet again, normal. The unnatural shadows were gone, and my flashlight beam was strong and steady once more. But something was different. When I looked at the shadows cast by the trees in the moonlight, I couldn't see them. My eyes passed right over the dark spots, unable to focus on them. I had given up my ability to see in darkness, to perceive shadows at all, in exchange for banishing the shadow that feeds. Spirit licked my hand weakly. He was still old, his youth stolen by the shadow's touch. He would live a few more months, just long enough for me to bring him home, to die peacefully, surrounded by my family. As for me, I would never again be able to see in the dark. Nighttime would always be a blind spot for me now, a small price to pay for sending the hungry darkness back to wherever it came from. I gathered Spirit in my arms, his body light and frail, and began the long walk back to my truck. The forest felt clean again, balanced. The animals would return, the shadows would behave as shadows should. But sometimes at night, when I sit on my porch and stare into the darkness I can no longer see, I wonder if the shadow that feeds is out there, watching, waiting, growing hungry again. And I wonder who will be there to fight it when it returns.